The sun hung like a copper coin over the wasteland, bleeding heat across a landscape that had long ago surrendered to dust and despair. The trail into Ashfall was marked not by signposts, but by the bones of those who'd tried to leave. Cattle skulls bleached white, wagon wheels half buried in sand, and once the rusted remains of a stagecoach with bullet holes spelling out its final story. Rhett Calder rode this path on a horse the color of smoke, his silhouette wavering in the heat shimmer like something not quite solid, not quite real. He wore the desert on his skin, dust in the creases of his leather vest, sand in the stubble of his jaw, and in his eyes, that particular emptiness that comes from seeing too many sunsets alone. His hat was pulled low, casting his face in shadow, and across his back hung a rifle wrapped in oilcloth, anonymous as a promise not yet kept. The town materialized ahead like a fever dream, its buildings sagging against each other in mutual exhaustion. Ashfall, even the name tasted like ash. As Rhett guided his horse down what passed for a main street, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a town at rest, but the held-breath hush of prey freezing at the scent of predators. Windows shuttered despite the heat. Doors closed tight. The few people visible moved with their heads down, shoulders hunched, as if trying to make themselves smaller targets. A woman hurried past, clutching a basket to her chest. She glanced at Rhett, and in that split second before she looked away, he saw it. The calculation. Stranger. Danger. Don't engage. She disappeared into a building so quickly she might have been swallowed by it. The saloon squatted at the town center like a bloated spider, its paint peeling in long strips that curled in the heat. Above the door, a sign creaked on rusted chains. The Brass Spur. Through the grimy windows, Rhett could make out movement, shapes that carried themselves with the loose swagger of men who'd never been told no. He dismounted, tied his horse to the rail with a knot that could be undone in one pull, and stood for a moment listening. From inside came laughter, the kind that has nothing to do with joy. A glass shattered. Someone cursed. More laughter. The batwing doors swung open under his hand with a sound like dry bones rattling. The saloon's interior was a study in controlled decay. Sawdust on the floor, stained dark in places best not examined too closely. Tables scarred with knife marks and bullet gouges. A bar that had once been fine mahogany, now dulled by spilled whiskey and the grime of unwashed hands. The air hung thick with smoke, sweat, and something else, the particular stink of fear that had soaked into the wood itself. 7 men occupied the space. 4 sat at a corner table, cards forgotten in front of them as they watched the real entertainment. 2 more flanked the bar, bottles in hand but eyes sharp. And at the center of it all, holding a man by the collar and driving his face toward the bar top with methodical cruelty, stood someone who could only be Pike's lieutenant. He was built like a bear and moved like one too. All power, no grace needed. His name, Rhett would learn later, was Cutter Doyle, and he'd earned that name with a 10-inch blade he kept at his hip and used with artistic frequency. "I'll ask one more time, old man," Cutter growled, his voice like gravel in a grinder. "Where's the rest?" The man he held was thin, gray-haired, his face already blooming with bruises. "I gave you everything," he wheezed. "The shop. It doesn't make more than—" His words cut off as Cutter slammed his head down. Not hard enough to knock him out, but hard enough to break skin. Blood welled up, dripping onto the bar. "Now that's just disrespectful," Cutter said, shaking his head with mock sadness. "Mr. Pike sets a fair price for protection, and you're telling me your little shop can't afford it? That hurts my feelings, Mr. Chen. Really does." "Please," Chen managed. "My daughter, she's sick. The medicine—" "Should have thought of that before you decided to hold out on us." The bartender, a skeletal man with watery eyes, polished the same glass over and over, his hand shaking. The card players watched with the dead expressions of people who'd seen this show before. No one moved to help. No one would. Rhett walked to the bar, his boots loud in the sudden quiet that followed his entrance. Every eye tracked him now, the stranger, the unknown variable, the potential problem. "Whiskey," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. "The real stuff, not whatever you're watering down for the locals." The bartender blinked, looked from Rhett to Cutter and back again. You deaf? Rhett asked mildly. Whiskey. Cutter released Chen, who slumped against the bar, breathing hard. The big man straightened, rolling his shoulders, and turned to face Rhett fully. Up close, he was even larger, with the kind of bulk that comes from both muscle and meanness. His face bore the map of old fights, a crooked nose, scar tissue around the eyes, teeth that didn't quite line up when he smiled. And he was smiling now. You new in town, friend? Passing through, Rhett said. Passing through. Cutter drew out the words, tasting them. Well, see, there's a toll for that. Mr. Pike likes to know who's visiting his town, likes them to show proper respect. Your Mr. Pike owned the Sun too? Because I'd like to file a complaint about the heat. The card players shifted. One of them, a wiry man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, laughed nervously, then stopped when Cutter's eyes flicked toward him. Funny, Cutter said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. You got a name, funny man? Calder. Well, Mr. Calder, here's how it works in Ashfall. You want to drink, you want to sleep, you want to take a piss, you pay the toll. $20 silver. Call it a friendship fee. Rhett accepted the whiskey the bartender had finally poured with trembling hands. He took a sip, savoring it, then set the glass down with a soft click. No thanks, he said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the heat outside. Cutter's smile widened, showing those crooked teeth. Maybe you didn't hear me right. I heard fine. You want $20 for the privilege of your boss pretending to own a town he's just squatting in. I'm declining the offer. Declining. Cutter's hand drifted toward his belt, where that 10-inch blade waited. You know how many men have declined in this town? Fewer than there used to be, I'd wager. Smart man. So you understand the situation. I understand you're between me and my drink. For a moment, everything hung suspended. The kind of moment where time seems to thicken, where the next second could break in any direction. Cutter's hand hovered over his knife. The card players had stopped pretending to play, cards forgotten. Even Chen had frozen, blood still dripping from his split forehead. Then Cutter laughed, a big booming sound that filled the saloon. You got spine, Calder. I'll give you that. Most men take one look at me and find their wallets real quick. He stepped closer, close enough that Rhett could smell the whiskey and rotting meat on his breath. But spine ain't enough. Not here. Not in Ashfall. He reached out, almost casually, and flicked Rhett's hat off his head. Rhett didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, his hat on the floor behind him, his eyes locked on Cutter's. Pick it up, Cutter said softly. No. Pick it up. Make me. The knife came out fast. Cutter was quick for a big man. But Rhett was quicker. He moved like water, like wind, like something that had spent years learning to read violence before it arrived. His hand caught Cutter's wrist mid-draw, twisted, and suddenly the big man was stumbling forward, off balance, his knife hand trapped and his face heading for the bar. Rhett let him fall, stepped back, and picked up his hat. Like I said, he dusted off the brim, you're between me and my drink. Cutter came up snarling, blood from his nose, broken where it had met the bar, streaming down his face. The knife was still in his hand, and now it was moving with purpose, a wide slash meant to open Rhett from hip to shoulder. Rhett leaned back just enough. The blade whispered past, missing by inches. He caught Cutter's extended arm, used the man's own momentum to spin him, and drove his boot into the back of Cutter's knee. The big man went down hard, his knife skittering across the floor. Before Cutter could rise, Rhett had his boot on the man's knife hand, pinning it. Here's what's going to happen, Rhett said, his voice calm, conversational. You're going to stay down. Your friends, he glanced at the card players, at the men by the bar, are going to stay sitting, and I'm going to finish my drink. After that, I'll find somewhere to stable my horse and get some sleep. In the morning, I'll decide whether this town is worth staying in or if I should just keep riding. You're dead, Cutter spat, blood bubbling from his broken nose. You hear me? Dead. Mr. Pike is going to... Rhett pressed down harder with his boot. Cutter's words became a yelp. Mr. Pike, Rhett said, can come find me himself if he's got a problem. Until then, I suggest you learn some manners. He released Cutter, retrieved his whiskey, and drained it in one swallow. Then he dropped a coin on the bar, exactly enough for the drink, not a cent more, and walked out. Behind him, the saloon erupted in chaos. Cutter was shouting orders. Men were scrambling. The card players were suddenly very interested in their hands again. And Chen, still bleeding, looked at the door through which the stranger had disappeared with something that might have been hope. Outside, Rhett untied his horse and led it down the street, taking his time, letting the town get a good look at him. He could feel eyes on him from every window, every doorway. Word would spread fast. Stranger came to town. Put Cutter Doyle on his back. Didn't pay the toll. He found a stable at the edge of town, run by a bent-backed man who accepted his money with shaking hands and asked no questions. Rhett rubbed down his horse personally, checking its hooves, making sure the feed was good. The horse had carried him too many miles to trust it to a stranger's care. "There's a room," the stable keeper said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Above the stable. It ain't much, but it's private. Door's got a good lock." "How much?" "Already paid for." The old man wouldn't meet his eyes. "By someone who appreciates what you did in there." "I didn't do anything." "That's more than most do." Rhett studied the man, the permanent hunch of his shoulders, the way he kept glancing toward the street as if expecting violence to come walking in. "How long has Pike run this town?" 3 years. 3 years this October." The old man finally looked up, and his eyes were ancient, haunted. "Before that, we had a sheriff, good man. Name was Holloway. He stood up to Pike when the gang first rode in, demanding their toll. Pike shot him in the street. Made us watch, made us—" He swallowed hard. "Made us bury him in an unmarked grave, like he was nothing. And since then? Since then we pay. We bow. We survive." He turned back to his work, pitchfork in hand, his voice dropping even lower. "Until now, maybe." "Don't," Rhett said sharply. "Don't think that. I'm just passing through. You stood up to Cutter. I defended myself, that's all. That's more than we've done in 3 years." Rhett climbed the stairs to the room without another word. Inside, it was as promised, not much. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window that looked out onto the main street, but it was clean, and the door had a solid bolt. He set his rifle beside the bed, within easy reach, and moved to the window. From here, he could see most of Ashfall. The saloon, still buzzing with activity. The general store, closed up tight. A church with a broken steeple, looking as abandoned as hope itself. And beyond it all, the desert stretching endless, indifferent to the small dramas of small men. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise, Rhett saw them coming. 5 riders, moving with purpose down the main street. At their head rode a man who could only be Nemo Pike. Even at a distance, Pike commanded attention. He sat his horse like a king surveying his domain, his bearing erect, his clothes finer than anyone else's in this dusty hell. He wore black vest, black pants, black hat, and in the dying light, he looked like a shadow given form and purpose. The rider stopped in front of the saloon. Pike dismounted with the kind of grace that spoke of education, of privilege once held and violently claimed again. He was tall, lean, with the face of a poet and the eyes of a snake. When he smiled, and he was smiling now as Cutter limped out to meet him, it was the smile of a man who genuinely enjoyed the suffering of others. Rhett couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read the body language, Cutter gesturing wildly, pointing back toward the stable. Pike listening, that smile never wavering. Then Pike's head turned, and even across the distance, Rhett felt the weight of those eyes finding him in the window. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Pike raised one hand in a mock salute, the gesture equal parts greeting and challenge. Then he and his men went inside the saloon, and Ashfall held its breath. Night fell hard and fast, as it did in the desert. Rhett didn't light a lamp. Instead, he sat in the darkness, his rifle across his knees, and waited. He'd learned long ago that the first night in a new place told you everything you needed to know. Some towns, you could sleep easy. Others, you kept one eye open. Ashfall, he suspected, would require both eyes. The sounds of the saloon carried on the still air, laughter, breaking glass, a woman's scream abruptly cut off. More laughter. Somewhere a dog barked, then went silent. The whole town had the feel of a place holding itself together with spit and prayer, waiting for the final thread to snap. Around midnight, Rhett heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, making no attempt at stealth. A knock followed, 3 measured raps. "Mr. Calder?" A woman's voice, educated, tired. "I know you're awake. May I come in?" Rhett moved to the side of the door, rifle ready. "Who are you?" "My name is Sarah Holloway. I was the sheriff's daughter. I'd like to talk." He opened the door a crack. In the moonlight spilling through the window, he could make out a woman in her late 30s, wearing a dress that had once been fine, but was now mended in a dozen places. Her face was lined with worry and something harder, the kind of determination that comes from losing everything and deciding to fight anyway. "5 minutes," Rhett said, opening the door fully. She came in, declined the chair he offered, and stood with her back straight, hands clasped in front of her. "They're going to kill you," she said without preamble. "Pike doesn't tolerate defiance. He'll make an example of you, probably tomorrow, probably in the street, where everyone can see. Appreciate the warning. I'm not here to warn you. I'm here to ask you to leave, tonight. Take your horse and ride out, and don't look back." Rhett tilted his head, studying her. "Why do you care if I live or die?" "Because if Pike kills you, he'll use it to remind this town what happens to anyone who stands up. He'll make it slow, painful, a lesson." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I've seen enough lessons. Your father, my father believed in law, in order, in doing the right thing." She laughed bitterly. "It got him killed and left this town without hope. So yes, Mr. Calder, I'd rather you leave than become another lesson." "What if I don't want to leave?" "Then you're a fool." "Maybe." Rhett moved back to the window, looking out at the dark street. "Or maybe I'm tired of running." "Running from what?" He didn't answer. In the silence, Sarah moved beside him, following his gaze. "There are 17 families left in Ashfall," she said quietly. "We had 63 before Pike came. Some ran, some died. The rest—" She gestured vaguely at the shuttered windows, the empty streets. "The rest survive. We pay our tolls. We keep our heads down. We've learned that resistance only brings pain." "What about you? You learned that lesson?" She smiled, sharp as broken glass. "I learned my father was right about one thing. There are fates worse than death. Living as a coward is one of them." "Then why are you here asking me to run?" "Because I'm a coward who wants to keep other people from dying for my principles." She turned to face him fully. "Pike has 19 men, 19 killers, thieves, and rapists who answer to him absolutely. You're one man. Good with your hands, clearly, but one man. The mathematics aren't complicated, Mr. Calder." "I've never been good at math." "This isn't a joke." "No," Rhett agreed. "It's not." They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, the saloon was finally quieting. Soon, Pike's men would stumble to whatever holes they slept in, and the town would have a few hours of fragile peace. "What did your father do?" Rhett asked. "Before Pike shot him?" Sarah's face went hard. "He called Pike out, told him to leave town or face justice." Pike laughed at him. "Asked him what justice looks like when you're outnumbered 20-1. My father drew his gun." She paused, the memory clearly painful. "He was fast. Not fast enough. Pike shot him 3 times, chest, stomach, leg, made him bleed out in the street while the whole town watched. It took 20 minutes. You were there." "Everyone was there. Pike made sure of it." Her hands tightened into fists. "He said anyone who tried to help my father would join him. So we watched. All of us. We watched a good man die alone in the dirt." "And after?" "After, Pike declared himself the law, set his tolls. Anyone who couldn't pay lost their business, their home, sometimes their lives. Anyone who resisted—" She shook her head. "There's a field outside town. We don't go there anymore. Too many unmarked graves." Rhett absorbed this, filing it away with everything else he'd observed. A town stripped of hope, ruled by fear, kept in line by systematic brutality. Standard operating procedure for men like Pike. They found a weakness, isolation, lack of law, desperation, and exploited it until the place was bled dry. Then they moved on to the next town, unless someone stopped them. "Your 5 minutes are up," Rhett said. Sarah nodded, moving toward the door. Then she paused, looked back. "For what it's worth, what you did to Cutter, it was the first time in 3 years I've seen anyone in this town smile. Old Chen, after you left, he couldn't stop grinning. Even with his face beaten bloody, he was grinning. Smiles don't stop bullets. No, but they remind you what you're fighting for." She opened the door, then added, "There's a back way out of the stable. The old man will show you. If you're going to run, do it before dawn. After that, Pike will have men watching every road." "I'll keep that in mind." She left, her footsteps fading down the stairs. Rhett locked the door behind her and returned to his vigil by the window. He thought about running. He'd done it before, ridden into towns, seen the same pattern of corruption and control, and decided his involvement would only make things worse. Some places were too far gone. Some people were too beaten down to save themselves, even if you gave them the chance. But something about Ashfall gnawed at him. Maybe it was Chen's grin. Maybe it was Sarah's brittle courage. Maybe it was just the heat and the dust and the way this town felt like a grave waiting to be filled. Or maybe it was Pike himself. That smug salute, that certainty that he'd won before the game had even begun. Rhett had never liked being told he'd lost. Dawn came like a judgment, the sun hauling itself over the horizon with visible effort, already hot, already merciless. Rhett hadn't slept. He'd watched the town through the night, mapping its rhythms, identifying Pike's men as they staggered from the saloon and dispersed to various buildings. 19, Sarah had said. He'd counted 17 so far, which meant 2 were probably out on patrol or sleeping somewhere he couldn't see. He washed his face in the basin, the water warm even though it had sat all night. His reflection looked back at him from the cloudy mirror, 3 days of stubble, eyes red from dust and sleeplessness, and that familiar expression of a man who'd made a decision he wasn't entirely comfortable with. "You're an idiot, Calder," he told his reflection. His reflection agreed silently. He checked his rifle, his pistol, his knife. Not that it would matter much against 19 men, but habit died hard. Then he descended the stairs to find the stable keeper already awake, mucking out stalls with the nervous energy of a man expecting disaster. "Morning," Rhett said. The old man jumped, dropped his pitchfork. "Jesus, sorry, I didn't—" He bent to retrieve the tool, his hands shaking worse than yesterday. "Miss Sarah said you might be leaving early. I can saddle your horse, no charge, just—" "I'm not leaving." The pitchfork clattered to the ground again. "What?" "I'm staying, for a while at least." "But Pike, you can't—" The old man looked genuinely distressed. "Mr. Calder, I don't know what you're thinking, but this ain't your fight. This town, we're already dead. We just haven't laid down yet." "That's cheerful." "It's honest." The stable keeper moved closer, lowering his voice. "Pike's got this town sewn up tight. He controls the water rights, the roads, the supply lines. We can't leave even if we wanted to. Where would we go? The nearest town with a real law is 3 days' ride through desert that'll kill you if the Apaches don't get you first. So you're trapped. We're done." The old man's shoulders slumped. "And you standing up to Cutter yesterday. That was brave. Maybe even noble. But all it's going to do is get you killed and remind us why we don't fight back." Rhett considered this. It was logical, reasonable, probably even correct. Any sane man would saddle up and ride out. Any smart man would recognize a lost cause. He'd never claimed to be either sane or smart. "How's your roof?" he asked instead. The old man blinked. "My... what?" "Your roof, the stable roof. It looks like it's got some weak spots. I'm decent with repairs. Thought I might earn my keep while I'm here." "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Rhett smiled without humor. No pun intended. Or, by mid-morning, half the town knew that Calder hadn't run. The other half learned shortly after, because Pike made sure they did. It started with the church bell, the same bell that hadn't rung since the day Sheriff Holloway died. Someone pulled the rope hard, and the cracked tone rolled across Ashfall like a death knell. Ding, ding, ding. Rhett was on the stable roof when he heard it, hammer in hand, actually fixing the weak spots he'd identified. He straightened, looking toward the town center where people were emerging from their homes and businesses, drawn by that sound like moths to flame. "It's a summons," the stable keeper called up from below. "Pike uses the bell when he wants everyone gathered. You don't come, his men drag you out." "What's he want?" "You, I'd wager." Rhett set down his hammer, climbed down the ladder, and started walking toward the church square. Behind him, the old man called out a warning, but Rhett ignored it. If Pike wanted to make an example, better to meet it head-on than wait for it to come to him. The church square was filling rapidly. Men, women, even children, all with that same hunched, defeated posture. They arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, leaving a wide space in the center empty. Waiting. Pike stood on the church steps, his 19 men arrayed around him like a dark honor guard. In the morning light, Rhett could see him better, mid-40s, handsome in a cruel way, with pale eyes that tracked movement like a predator's. He wore those same black clothes, now with the addition of a red silk vest that screamed wealth in a town drowning in poverty. When Rhett entered the square, the murmuring stopped. Every eye turned to him. Pike's smile widened. "There he is!" Pike's voice carried effortlessly, trained for speeches, for pronouncements. "Mr. Rhett Calder, the man of the hour, please join us." Rhett walked forward, taking his time, letting Pike wait. He stopped at the edge of the empty center space, thumbs hooked in his belt, expression neutral. "You wanted to see me?" "Wanted to see you?" "My dear Mr. Calder, the whole town wants to see you." Pike gestured expansively. "You've become quite the topic of conversation. The stranger who stood up to Cutter. The mysterious drifter who refused to pay his toll. Why, you're practically a folk hero already." "I just wanted a drink." "Just a drink." Pike descended the steps with theatrical slowness. "And yet, in getting that drink, you assaulted one of my men, disrupted my establishment, and violated the basic laws of hospitality that govern this town." "Your laws?" "The only laws that matter here." Pike reached the center of the square, standing perhaps 10 feet from Rhett. Up close, those pale eyes were even more unsettling, intelligent, calculating, and completely devoid of empathy. "You see, Mr. Calder, Ashfall has a simple system. I provide protection, and the good people here compensate me for that service. It's not tyranny, it's not oppression, it's just business." "Protection from what?" Rhett asked. "You're the only threat within 50 miles. Pike's smile never wavered. "Exactly. That's what makes it such an efficient arrangement." A ripple went through the crowd, nervous laughter from Pike's men, nervous silence from everyone else. "But," Pike continued, beginning to pace, playing to his audience, "occasionally someone comes along who doesn't understand the rules. Someone who thinks the old ways, law, justice, individual rights, still apply." He stopped, looking directly at Rhett. "Is that you, Mr. Calder? A man out of time? A knight-errant looking to slay dragons?" "I'm just looking for some peace and quiet." "Then you've come to the wrong place." Pike's tone shifted, hardening. "This is my town. These are my people. And you? You're a disruption, a variable, and I don't like variables." Cutter Doyle stepped forward from his position in Pike's honor guard. His nose was bandaged, both eyes blackened, and he looked at Rhett with undisguised murder in his gaze. "Let me handle him, Mr. Pike," Cutter said. "Let me show him proper manners." Pike held up a hand. "Patience, Cutter. Mr. Calder deserves a choice. That's what separates us from animals, after all. Choice." He turned back to Rhett. "Here's yours. You can apologize, right here, right now, in front of everyone. Apologize to Cutter, pay double the standard toll as a fine, and I'll let you leave town alive. Door number 1. And door number 2? You can fight." Pike gestured to the empty space. "You and Cutter, no weapons, just fists and determination. You win, you walk away. You lose." He shrugged. "Well, Cutter tends to be thorough." Rhett looked at Cutter, 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and meanness, with reach and power advantage. Then he looked at Pike, at those calculating eyes, and understood this was a show. Win or lose, this was about breaking the town's spirit one more time, reminding them that resistance brought only pain. Let me suggest door number 3, Rhett said. Pike raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I stay. I keep to myself. I don't cause trouble, and neither do your men. We all act like civilized people. Civilized. Pike tasted the word. How quaint. But I'm afraid that doesn't work for me. You see, the moment I let one man refuse the toll, refuse the rules, the whole system falls apart. Today it's you. Tomorrow it's Chen. Next week everyone thinks they can say no. He shook his head. Can't have that. So I'll ask again, door 1 or door 2? Rhett looked past Pike at the assembled crowd. He saw Sarah Holloway, her face a mask of resignation. He saw Chen, his forehead still bandaged, hope and fear warring in his expression. He saw the stable keeper, dozens of others, all waiting to see which way this would break. And he made his choice. Door 2, he said, and began unbuckling his gun belt. A collective intake of breath from the crowd. Pike's smile turned genuine, delighted. Excellent. A man of spirit. I do appreciate that. He stepped back, giving them room. Standard rules apply. Fight until one man can't continue. No weapons, no interference, and may the best man win. Cutter was already rolling his shoulders, cracking his knuckles, looking at Rhett like a starving dog eyes a steak. This is gonna hurt, he promised. Gonna hurt so good. Rhett handed his gun belt to the stable keeper who'd pushed through the crowd. The old man took it with trembling hands. You don't have to do this, he whispered. Yeah, Rhett said. I do. He turned to face Cutter just as the bigger man charged. The first punch came like a hammer, a wide right hook meant to take Rhett's head off. He ducked under it, felt the wind of its passing, and drove his own fist into Cutter's exposed ribs. It was like punching a barn door, solid, unyielding, painful for everyone involved. Cutter barely grunted. His left hand shot out, caught Rhett by the vest, and yanked him forward into a rising knee. Rhett twisted, took it on the thigh instead of the stomach, and brought his elbow down hard on Cutter's arm. The grip loosened. Rhett spun free, put distance between them. They circled each other, dust rising from their boots. The crowd had gone silent, holding its collective breath. You're quick, Cutter admitted. But quick won't save you. I've broken quicker men. He came again, this time with more control. A series of jabs meant to set up another power shot. Rhett slipped most of them, took one on the shoulder that went numb instantly, and fired back with a combination to Cutter's already broken nose. Blood exploded. Cutter roared, more anger than pain, and this time when he charged there was no technique, just raw fury. He crashed into Rhett like a bull, driving them both to the ground. They rolled in the dust, trading short punches, knees, elbows, dirty fighting, the kind that wins when rules don't matter. Cutter ended up on top, his weight crushing, and brought his fist down toward Rhett's face. Rhett turned his head just enough. The punch hit the ground beside his ear, Cutter's knuckles splitting on the hard pan. Using Cutter's moment of distraction, Rhett bucked his hips, threw the bigger man off balance, and scrambled free. Both men rose, breathing hard, bleeding, eyeing each other with newfound respect. Not bad, Cutter panted. Still gonna kill you. You keep saying that. They came together again, and this time it was brutal, efficient violence. No fancy moves, no showboating, just two men trying to break each other, one punch at a time. Rhett took a fist to the mouth that split his lip. He returned it with a knee to Cutter's kidney. Cutter caught him with an uppercut that rattled his teeth. Rhett responded with a throat strike that left Cutter gagging. They separated again, both bleeding, both struggling for air in the heat. The crowd watched in awful silence. This wasn't entertainment. This was something older, more primal. Two predators establishing dominance, and everyone else just hoping to survive the aftermath. You can still walk away, Pike called from the church steps, his tone amused. Just say the word, Mr. Calder, apologize, and this all stops. Rhett spat blood into the dust. Not much of a talker. Cutter laughed, a wet, bubbling sound. Damn, but I like you, Calder. Shame I gotta ruin that face. He rushed forward one more time, but he was tiring, his movements slower, more predictable. Rhett saw the right hook coming from a mile away. He ducked, stepped inside Cutter's guard, and drove a devastating combination into the bigger man's solar plexus. Left, right, left. Each punch placed with surgical precision. Cutter's eyes went wide. His mouth opened in a silent gasp. His hands dropped. Rhett finished it with an uppercut that started somewhere around his knees and ended on Cutter's chin. The sound of impact echoed across the square like a gunshot. Cutter dropped like a felled tree, unconscious before he hit the ground. The silence that followed was absolute. Rhett stood over Cutter's fallen form, breathing hard, blood dripping from his split lip, his knuckles raw and swelling. He looked up at Pike, waiting. Pike's smile had frozen on his face, no longer amused. For a long moment he simply stared at Rhett, recalculating, reassessing. Then that smile returned, different now, sharper, colder. "Well," he said softly, "that was unexpected." He descended the steps slowly, his men parting to let him through. He stopped beside Cutter's unconscious form, looking down at his lieutenant with something that might have been disappointment. "Rules are rules," Pike said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Mr. Calder won, fair and square." He looked up, those pale eyes locking onto Rhett's. "You're free to go, or stay, or whatever you like. No hard feelings." "No hard feelings," Rhett repeated flatly. "Of course not. I'm a man of my word." Pike's smile widened. "Though I do wonder, Mr. Calder, what you think you've won here. A fight? A moral victory? The town's admiration? Just a drink and some peace." "Peace," Pike laughed. A genuine sound this time, delighted. "Oh, you're not going to get that. But you're welcome to try." He turned to his men. "Get Cutter to the doctor. The rest of you, back to work. Show's over." The crowd began to disperse slowly, hesitantly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter whatever spell had kept violence at bay. Pike started to turn away, then paused. "One more thing, Mr. Calder. That peace you're looking for? It doesn't exist in Ashfall. Not anymore. Not since—" He smiled again. "Well, not since I made it interesting. But please, enjoy your stay. I suspect it will be, memorable." He walked away, his men forming up around him, leaving Rhett standing alone in the center of the square with an unconscious Cutter and a town full of people who didn't know whether to cheer or mourn. Sarah Holloway was the first to approach. She looked at Rhett's battered face, at his bleeding knuckles, and shook her head. "You're either very brave or very stupid," she said. "Can't I be both? You just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in 3 territories. He was already my enemy. Now at least it's honest." She studied him for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine. "My father would have liked you," she said. "He always did have a soft spot for lost causes. Is that what I am?" "That's what we all are, Mr. Calder. The question is whether you're the kind of lost cause that burns out or burns down." She walked away, leaving Rhett to collect his gun belt from the stable keeper, who was looking at him with something approaching awe. "That was—" The old man searched for words. "That was something." "That was stupid," Rhett corrected. He strapped on his gun, feeling the familiar weight settle against his hip. "And it's probably going to get worse before it gets better." "You really staying?" Rhett looked around Ashfall, at the broken buildings, the beaten people, the town that had forgotten how to hope. He thought about riding out, leaving this all behind, finding some other place where the problems weren't his and the pain belonged to someone else. He'd done it before. He could do it again. But something Chen's grin kept playing in his mind, and Sarah's brittle courage, and the way that church bell had sounded, broken, cracked, but still calling. "Yeah," he said finally, "I'm staying, at least for a while. Then you'll need supplies, food, ammunition, medical kit. Pike's men will be watching the general store, waiting to see what you do next. Let them watch." They walked back to the stable together, Rhett moving carefully now that the adrenaline was fading and the pain was settling in. His ribs ached where Cutter had hit him. His jaw throbbed. His hands felt like they'd been run over by a wagon. But he'd won. Against all odds, against all logic, he'd stood up to Pike's best enforcer and put him down. It was, he knew, just the beginning. That night, Rhett sat in his room again, cleaning his rifle by moonlight. His face had been tended to by a nervous doctor who'd appeared at the stable without being summoned, treated his wounds without asking for payment, and disappeared just as quickly. "A gift," the stable keeper explained, "from the town. Or maybe just from Chen, who apparently owned the doctor's building." His hands were bandaged now, the knuckles cleaned and salved. His ribs were wrapped tight. His lip had stopped bleeding, though it would scar. Small prices for what he'd bought. Outside, Ashfall was quiet. Too quiet. Pike's men weren't in the saloon tonight. They were out there, in the dark, watching, waiting, planning. Rhett knew how this would go. Pike couldn't let the challenge stand. Couldn't let some drifter beat his man and walk away without consequences. Honor, reputation, control, they all demanded a response. The only question was when and how savage it would be. Around midnight, a stone clattered against his window. Rhett moved to the side, looked down carefully. Sarah stood in the alley below, wrapped in a dark cloak. He opened the window. Little late for a social call. "I have information," she hissed up at him. "Important. Let me in." He descended, let her in through the stable's back door, led her up to his room. She was breathing hard, as if she'd run there. "Pike's calling in reinforcements," she said without preamble. "I overheard him talking to his men. He's sending riders to Deadwood, Copperhead, and Silver Creek, calling in favors. He's going to bring in 20 more guns, maybe 30. "When?" 2 weeks, maybe less." She paced the small room. "You humiliated him today. He can't let that stand. He's going to destroy you, and he's going to make sure the whole territory knows what happens to people who cross Nemo Pike." Rhett absorbed this, running calculations. 2 weeks, maybe less. Against 50 men instead of 20. "You should run," Sarah continued. "Tonight, right now. Take your horse and don't stop until you hit California." "Thought you wanted me to stay." "Wanted me to fight. I wanted you to inspire us. You did that. Chen hasn't stopped grinning all day. The baker gave away free bread. People are talking, actually talking, instead of just surviving. You gave us that." Her eyes glistened in the moonlight. "But I won't watch another good man die in these streets. I can't. So please, Mr. Calder, please run." "What about you? What about Chen and the baker and everyone else?" "We'll go back to how it was, surviving. It's not much, but it's something." "For how long?" Rhett asked softly. "How much longer before Pike bleeds this town completely dry? Before there's nothing left but ghosts and memories?" She had no answer for that. 2 weeks, Rhett said. "That's how long I've got? At most. Then I'd better make them count." He moved to his saddlebag, pulled out a map, spread it on the small table. Sarah moved closer, watching as he traced the terrain around Ashfall. "Tell me about the land," he said. "The desert, the canyons, the water sources. Everything." "Why?" He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Not fear, not resignation, but the cold calculation of a man planning a war. "Because," he said, "if Pike wants to make this a fight, I'm going to give him one he'll never forget." The map spread across the table told a story of isolation and opportunity. Sarah traced the routes with her finger, her voice low and urgent in the lamplight that Rhett had finally allowed himself to burn. 3 canyons ring Ashfall, she said. Devil's Throat to the north, narrow, treacherous. Flash floods every spring have carved it into a maze. No one goes there, not even Pike's men. Water source? A creek runs through it. Seasonal, but this time of year it's flowing. The Apaches used to use it as a hunting ground before they moved south. Rhett made a mark on the map. What else? East is the Scorpion Flats. Alkali desert, nothing but salt and heat. You can see for 20 miles in every direction, which makes it useless for hiding but perfect for spotting riders. And south? Sarah hesitated. Blackstone Ridge. Rock formations like broken teeth, caves everywhere. It's where Pike's men hide their extra ammunition, stolen goods, things they don't want in town. There's a natural spring there, the only reliable water for 30 miles besides the town well. Pike controls the spring? He has 2 men stationed there permanently, rotate them every week. Rhett studied the map, his mind working through possibilities, discarding most of them. 2 weeks to prepare for a force 3 times larger than what currently occupied the town. Conventional tactics wouldn't work. You couldn't outgun 50 men, couldn't outfight them in direct confrontation. But you could make them afraid. "Tell me about Pike's supply lines," he said. Sarah blinked at the change of subject. "He brings in goods from Copperhead once a month. Ammunition, whiskey, food. The wagon takes the northern route. avoids Apache territory. Who drives it? Local men, forced labor. Pike takes their sons as collateral, makes sure they don't run. When's the next shipment? 4 days. Rhett leaned back, pieces falling into place. He looked at Sarah, saw the intelligence in her eyes, the way she was already following his thoughts. You want to hit the supply wagon, she said slowly. I want to make Pike worry about something other than killing me. If you attack his supplies, he'll retaliate. Not against you, against the town. He's already planning to do that. Rhett tapped the map. Right now, Pike thinks he's in control. He's calling in reinforcements, planning his revenge, secure in the knowledge that he owns this town and everything in it. What happens when that security starts to crack? Sarah's eyes widened. You want him off balance. I want him scared. Scared men make mistakes. Pike doesn't scare easy. Everyone scares easy when you take away what they love most. Rhett's smile was cold. And Pike loves control. They spent the next hour going over details. Terrain, timing, Pike's routines, his men's habits. Sarah had been watching for 3 years, cataloging everything in the desperate hope that someday, somehow, it might matter. Now it did. When she finally left, slipping out into the darkness like a ghost, Rhett returned to his map. 2 weeks. It wasn't much time, but it was enough. Enough to plant seeds of doubt. Enough to turn Hunter into hunted. Enough to make Nemo Pike understand that Ashfall was about to become very expensive real estate. The next morning, Rhett was gone before dawn. The stable keeper found his room empty, the bed made with military precision, and a note weighted down by silver coins. Gone hunting, back by dark. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me. The old man pocketed the money and said nothing to the 3 of Pike's men, who came by an hour later, asking questions with their hands on their guns. Rhett, meanwhile, was 5 miles into the desert, moving through Devil's Throat Canyon with the caution of a man who understood that nature killed more people out here than bullets ever would. The canyon walls rose like cathedral spires on either side, red stone carved into impossible shapes by millennia of water and wind. He found what he was looking for around midday, a section where the canyon narrowed to barely 15 feet across, with unstable rock formations on both sides. A natural choke point. He studied it from multiple angles, tested the stability of the walls, and nodded to himself. This would work. He spent the afternoon gathering deadwood, stacking it in strategic locations, hiding it under brush and stone. Then he climbed the canyon wall, finding handholds in the weathered rock, pulling himself up 50 feet to a ledge that overlooked the entire passage. From here, a man with a rifle could command the whole canyon. A man with the right motivation could turn it into a killing ground. Rhett didn't plan to kill anyone. Not yet. But fear was a weapon sharper than any knife, and he intended to use it. He returned to Ashfall after dark, slipping back into the stable unseen. The old man looked up from his work, relief flooding his face. You had me worried, he said. Just scouting. Pike's men came by, 3 times. They're getting anxious. Good. The next day, Rhett stayed visible. He worked on the stable roof, made a show of buying supplies from the general store, paying full price, no toll, daring anyone to say something. Chen waved to him from his shop, still grinning despite the fading bruises. A few other townsfolk nodded in his direction, small gestures that would have been invisible a week ago, but now felt like rebellion. Pike's men watched from the shadows, reporting back, no doubt. Let them watch. Let them see a man going about his business, unthreatened, unbowed. Let them wonder what he was planning. That night, Sarah came again, this time with a young man in tow, barely 20, with the kind of lean build that came from hard work and scarce food. This is Marcus, she said. He drives the supply wagon. The boy, because despite his years he was still a boy, looked terrified. Miss Sarah said you might be able to help. My brother, he's... Pike has him. As guarantee. If I don't make the run, if anything goes wrong... Where does Pike keep the hostages? Rhett asked. Old hotel on the edge of town, 2nd floor, 3 rooms, always 2 guards. How many hostages total? 6. All boys, youngest is 12. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. They don't hurt them unless someone tries to run. Then they hurt them bad. Rhett looked at Sarah. saw the same calculation in her eyes. This complicated things. You couldn't just hit the wagon if it meant children died in retaliation. Tell me about the route, he said to Marcus. Every detail. The boy did, his words tumbling out in a rush. The wagon left Copperhead at dawn, took the northern trail through rough country, made camp at Widow's Creek the first night, then pushed through to Ashfall by afternoon of the second day. 2 outriders accompanied it, both Pike's men, both armed with repeating rifles. They ever have problems on the route? Rhett asked. Once, 3 months back, Apache raiding party hit them at Widow's Creek. The outriders fought them off, but barely, lost half the supplies. Pike's reaction? Marcus paled. He made an example, took it out on the guards' families, but not the driver. I wasn't driving then. Different boy. He didn't make it through the winter. The room fell silent. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, the sound lonely in the dark. The outriders, Rhett said finally. Tell me about them. Names are Decker and Shaw. Decker's the mean one, kills for fun, brags about it. Shaw's just empty, like he doesn't care about anything anymore. They loyal to Pike? Everyone's loyal to Pike. Ain't got a choice. Everyone has a choice, Rhett said quietly. They just don't always like the options. He sent Marcus home with instructions to act normal, make the run as planned, and trust that nothing would happen to his brother. The boy left looking only marginally less terrified than when he'd arrived. Sarah lingered. You have a plan. Working on it? Care to share? Not yet. The fewer people who know, the safer everyone is. She studied him in the lamplight. You're not just a drifter, are you? You've done this before. Fought people like Pike. Rhett didn't answer directly. Get some sleep. Things are going to start moving fast. After she left, he sat alone with his thoughts and his map. The supply wagon was a symbol, Pike's control over the town's lifeline, his ability to provide or withhold at will. Hit it hard enough, and you didn't just cost him supplies. You cost him the appearance of invincibility. But the hostages changed everything. Direct action would get children killed. He needed something subtler, something that would send a message without triggering immediate retaliation. He needed to make it look like accident or incompetence. He needed the Apaches. Not real ones. The Apaches had moved south years ago, following the buffalo and better hunting grounds. But Pike's men didn't know that. They knew the stories, the reputation, the fear that name carried. Sometimes fear was enough. The next morning, Rhett made another trip into the desert, this time heading east toward Scorpion Flats. He spent hours under the brutal sun, searching for specific items, eagle feathers, certain types of stone, the kind of markers that someone with limited knowledge might mistake for Apache sign. He found what he needed and carried it back, already planning where and how to deploy it. 2 days passed. Rhett maintained his routine, working on the stable, walking the town, being visible. Pike's men watched, but didn't approach. Cutter had recovered enough to glare death threats from the saloon porch, but he kept his distance. The tension in Ashfall wound tighter with each passing hour. People whispered in corners, glanced toward Rhett with expressions mixing hope and dread. The town was holding its breath, waiting for the other boot to drop. On the third day, Marcus drove his wagon out of town before dawn, heading toward Copperhead. Rhett watched him go, then gave it 2 hours before he saddled his horse and followed. He didn't take the main trail. Instead, he cut through rougher country, using terrain that would kill a wagon but pose no problem for a single rider who knew what he was doing. By late afternoon, he'd reached Widow's Creek, the campsite Marcus had mentioned, the place where the wagon would stop for the night. Rhett studied the area with a tactician's eye. The creek ran through a small valley, offering water and relatively flat ground for camping. Good defensive position if you were worried about attack from the valley floor, but vulnerable from the ridges above. He climbed to one of those ridges, moving carefully to avoid dislodging rocks that might give away his position. From up here, he had a clear view of the entire campsite. Then he waited. The sun crawled across the sky, heat radiating off the rocks in visible waves. Rhett rationed his water, staying still, conserving energy. He'd done this before, waited for hours, sometimes days, for the right moment. Patience was a weapon too, sharper than most people realized. As the sun began its descent, he heard the wagon before he saw it. The creak of wheels, the plodding rhythm of draft horses, voices calling back and forth. Marcus drove the wagon into the valley, looking exhausted, while the two outriders, Decker and Shaw, ranged ahead and to the sides, rifles ready. They made camp with practiced efficiency. Marcus tended the horses while Decker built a fire and Shaw disappeared into the brush, presumably to scout the perimeter. Within an hour, they had a decent setup: fire burning, coffee brewing, bedrolls laid out in a defensive triangle. Rhett watched them settle in, studying their routines, their dynamics. Decker did most of the talking, loud and crude, the kind of bully who needed an audience. Shaw barely spoke, just nodded occasionally, his eyes constantly scanning the darkening valley. Marcus kept to himself, eating quickly, clearly wanting this whole thing over with. As full dark fell, Rhett made his move. He descended from the ridge silent as thought, circling wide around the camp, staying in the shadows beyond the firelight's reach. He'd cached his supplies earlier, the feathers, the stones, other items that would sell the story he was crafting. First, he placed the markers, eagle feathers tied with grass in the Apache style, positioned where they'd be found come morning. Stones stacked in cairns that matched the old patterns, signs that someone had been watching the camp, studying it, preparing. Then he moved to the horses. The animals were picketed 30 yards from the fire, close enough to hear if something spooked them, far enough to graze. Rhett approached from downwind, moving with the patience of a man who'd spent years learning to be invisible. The horses noticed him, but didn't panic. He had a way with animals, always had. He stroked the nearest one's nose, whispered soothing nonsense, and carefully cut 3 of the 4 picket ropes. Not all of them. That would be too obvious. Just enough to make it look like someone had tried and been interrupted. He scattered a few more markers nearby, then withdrew back into the darkness. From his vantage point on the ridge, he watched the camp through the night. The men took watches in rotation, Decker first, then Shaw, with Marcus excused because he had to drive tomorrow. Each guard spent his time scanning the darkness nervously, rifles ready, jumping at every sound the desert made. Around 3 a.m, one of the horses, spooked by a sidewinder passing too close, pulled free from its cut rope and bolted. The sudden movement startled the others. Within seconds, all 3 freed horses were running, thundering into the night. The camp erupted. Decker was shouting. Shaw was scrambling for his rifle. Marcus was trying to save the one horse that remained tied. Chaos and confusion and fear. By the time they'd calmed down enough to assess the situation, dawn was breaking. And that's when they found the markers. Rhett watched from the ridge as Decker discovered the first feather, saw the man's face go pale, watched as Shaw found the cairns, the signs, the evidence of someone watching through the night. Apaches, Decker's voice carried up the valley, thick with fear. They were here, right here. They cut the horses loose. Apaches don't come this far north anymore, Shaw said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then what's this? Decker held up the feather. What's all this? They spent an hour searching the area, finding more signs, growing more nervous with each discovery. Marcus just wanted to leave, his eyes wide with terror. The remaining horse wasn't enough to pull the wagon. They'd have to leave it, carry what they could, and walk back to either Copperhead or push forward to Ashfall on foot. We go back, Decker decided. Tell Pike what happened. He'll send more men, more horses. We can retrieve the wagon later. The supplies, Marcus started, ain't worth dying for. You want to stay out here with Apaches circling? Be my guest. I'm heading back. They loaded themselves with what they could carry. Some of the ammunition, a few bottles of whiskey, the most valuable items, and abandoned the rest. Then they started the long walk back to Copperhead, moving fast, constantly looking over their shoulders. Rhett waited until they were out of sight, then descended to the abandoned wagon. He didn't take everything. That would make it too obvious. Instead, he removed specific items. Ammunition primarily, some medical supplies, a few weapons. Things that would hurt Pike tactically. He cached them in locations he'd scouted earlier, places only he could find again. The rest he left, but not before arranging it to look like it had been searched by someone looking for specific valuables. More confusion, more doubt. Then he erased his tracks, took one last look at the scene, and rode back toward Ashfall by a different route. By the time Decker and Shaw stumbled back into Copperhead 2 days later with their story of Apache raiders, Rhett was back in Ashfall, working on the stable roof like he'd never left. The reaction, when it came, exceeded his expectations. Pike received the news in the saloon, his face darkening with each word. The men who'd been drinking fell silent, watching their boss process the information. For a long moment, Pike said nothing, his pale eyes staring at something no one else could see. Then he smiled. "Apaches," he said softly. "How inconvenient." "Should we send out a party?" one of his men asked. "Get the wagon back, maybe track them?" "Track Apaches? Through that terrain?" Pike's smile widened. No, I don't think so. That would be playing their game." He stood, began to pace. "The Apaches haven't raided this far north in 5 years. Everyone knows that. So either they've suddenly changed their pattern, which seems unlikely, or—" He paused, letting the implication hang. "Or someone wants us to think it was Apaches," Cutter finished, his eyes narrowing. "Exactly." Pike turned to face his assembled men. "Someone smart. Someone who knows how to move unseen, how to manipulate circumstances, how to make us look weak." His gaze drifted toward the window, toward the stable where Rhett was supposedly working. "Someone who wants me worried about things other than crushing him like the insect he is." "Calder," Decker spat. "Has to be." "Can you prove it?" Pike asked mildly. "No, but then it's just suspicion. Interesting suspicion, admittedly, but not actionable." Pike returned to his chair, settling into it like a throne. "However, it does raise interesting questions. If Calder is responsible, he's more dangerous than I thought. If he's not, then we have actual Apaches to worry about. Either way," he steepled his fingers, "we have a problem." The men shifted uncomfortably. Pike let the silence stretch, building tension. "Double the guards on our supply cache at Blackstone Ridge," he said finally. "Send riders to Deadwood and Silver Creek. Tell them I need those reinforcements sooner than planned. 1 week, not 2. And put a price on information about Calder's movements. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to, everything he does." "What about the hostages?" someone asked. "Keep them locked down. If Calder tries anything, we make sure he knows there will be consequences." Pike's smile turned cruel. "In fact, bring the boys down to the square tomorrow. Public display. Let everyone see what happens when people forget who owns this town." Back at the stable, Rhett heard about Pike's orders from Sarah, who appeared after midnight, breathless and frightened. "He's going to hurt those children," she said. "Tomorrow, in the square. He says it's a reminder, but everyone knows it's a message to you." "He won't hurt them," Rhett said calmly. "How can you know that?" "Because hurting them serves no purpose except to turn the town against him completely. Pike's cruel, but he's not stupid. He'll make a show, scare everyone, but the children will be fine." "You're betting their lives on that?" "I'm betting on Pike being exactly what he is. A man who rules through fear but understands the difference between useful violence and waste." Rhett checked his rifle, began cleaning it. "He wants me to react, to do something stupid, emotional, to give him an excuse to escalate." "So what are you going to do?" "Nothing." Sarah stared at him. "Nothing?" "I'm going to stand in that square with everyone else and watch his show. I'm going to let him have his moment. And then I'm going to continue exactly what I was doing before." "Which is?" Rhett looked up from his rifle, his eyes hard. "Showing him that control is an illusion. That every move he makes, I'm 1 step ahead. That the more he tightens his grip, the more slips through his fingers. The wagon was just the beginning." The next morning, the church bell rang again. The town gathered, reluctant and afraid. Pike stood on the church steps with his men, and in front of him, lined up like soldiers, stood the 6 hostage children. They ranged from 12 to 17, all boys, all thin and scared, but trying to be brave. Their families stood in the crowd, faces twisted with helpless rage and terror. Rhett positioned himself in the middle of the crowd, visible but not prominent. He watched Pike work the audience, building drama, explaining how the town's safety depended on cooperation, how unfortunate incidents could be avoided if everyone just followed the simple rules. "These boys," Pike gestured to the hostages, "are insurance, guarantees of good behavior. Their families understand this. They've made peace with it. His eyes swept the crowd, lingering on certain faces. But I wonder if everyone appreciates what I'm protecting them from. The chaos, the violence, the uncertainty of life without order. He drew his pistol, a beautiful weapon, silver-plated with ivory grips. The crowd gasped. The mothers of the hostages cried out. Pike smiled and fired into the air. The shot echoed across the square like thunder. Children screamed. Adults flinched. The hostage boys stood frozen, eyes wide with terror. That, Pike said calmly, is the sound of my patience. Loud, unavoidable, and limited. He holstered the pistol. We've had some unfortunate incidents lately. Supply problems, questions about security, whispers of resistance. His eyes found Rhett in the crowd, locked onto him. These things concern me. They should concern you too, because when I'm concerned, when I'm worried about the stability of our little community, well, I get nervous. And when I get nervous, accidents happen. He let that hang in the air, heavy as lead. Fortunately, he continued, I'm a forgiving man, a patient man, so I'm going to give everyone a reminder, not a punishment. These boys go back to their rooms, their families continue their work, life goes on. But his voice hardened. The next time I have to gather everyone here, the next time I have to make a point about respect and order, I won't be so generous. He dismissed the crowd with a wave. People dispersed quickly, gratefully. The children hustled back to their prison by Pike's guards. Rhett stayed where he was until almost everyone had left. Then he walked, deliberately, casually, past the church steps where Pike still stood. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. No words were necessary. Pike's message was clear. I still own this town. I still control everything. Your little games don't matter. Rhett's response was equally clear. I'm still here. I'm not afraid, and I'm just getting started. He returned to the stable, his mind already 3 moves ahead. The wagon had been the opening gambit. Now it was time to press the advantage, to keep Pike off balance, to show him that control could be taken away one piece at a time. That night, he rode out again, this time toward Blackstone Ridge. The journey took most of the night. Rough terrain, careful navigation in the dark, constant awareness that one wrong move could break his horse's leg or send him tumbling off a cliff. But Rhett had learned to read the land, to move through darkness like he was part of it. He reached the ridge just before dawn, found a position overlooking the spring where Pike kept his cache. 2 guards, as Sarah had said, both looking bored and resentful of their assignment. Rhett settled in to watch, to learn their patterns, to find the weakness in their routine. Everyone had a weakness. Pike's men were no exception. He watched through the day as the guards rotated shifts, as they cooked meals, as they complained to each other about being stuck out here while everyone else was in town. He noted when they were most alert, when they relaxed, when they turned their backs. And as the sun set on another day in Ashfall, painting the desert in shades of blood and fire, Rhett began to plan his next move. Pike wanted control, wanted his town scared and compliant, wanted his enemy either dead or running. Rhett was going to give him something else entirely. He was going to give him chaos. The guards at Blackstone Ridge changed shifts at noon and midnight, a predictable rhythm that spoke of men who'd grown too comfortable in their isolation. Rhett watched the handoff through his spyglass as the sun climbed toward its apex. The day guard, a heavy-set man with a limp, greeting his replacement with obvious relief. They talked for maybe 5 minutes, sharing a canteen and complaints, before the relieved guard mounted his horse and headed back toward Ashfall. Which meant, for those 5 minutes, both men were distracted, their attention on each other rather than their surroundings. Rhett committed the pattern to memory, noted the timing, and began his descent from the observation point. He had what he needed. The question now was how to use it. He made it back to Ashfall by late afternoon, his horse lathered and exhausted from the hard ride. The stable-keeper took one look at the animal and shook his head. You're going to kill that horse riding it like this. She's tougher than she looks, Rhett said, but he spent extra time rubbing the animal down, making sure she had good feed and clean water. The old man was right. He was pushing hard, maybe too hard, but time wasn't a luxury he could afford. Pike's been asking about you, the stable-keeper said as Rhett worked. Sent men by 3 times today. Wanted to know where you were. What'd you tell them? That I mind horses, not people. They didn't like that answer much. The old man touched his ribs gingerly. One of them made his displeasure known. Rhett straightened, anger flashing hot and quick. Which one? Don't matter. I've had worse. The stable keeper waved it off, but Rhett could see the pain in his eyes, the way he moved carefully. Point is, Pike's getting anxious. Whatever you're doing, it's working, but that makes him dangerous. He was always dangerous. More dangerous then. Cutter's been talking about burning down buildings until someone tells them what you're up to. Few of the men think it's a fine idea. Rhett filed that away. Another piece of information, another pressure point. Pike's men were getting restless, eager for action. That kind of energy, bottled up too long, tended to explode in unpredictable ways. He could use that. That evening, he found Sarah at the old church, sweeping the floor in the fading light. The building had been abandoned since her father's death, too full of painful memories for the town to reclaim it, but she came here sometimes. To think, she'd told him once, to remember what fighting for something looked like. You're going to get yourself killed, she said, without looking up from her sweeping. Whatever you're planning out there in the desert, Pike's going to figure it out eventually. Let him figure it out. By then it'll be too late, for you or for him. Rhett moved to one of the broken windows, looking out at Ashfall as it settled into night. Lamps were being lit in windows. Doors were being locked. The town was preparing for another evening of fear, another night of wondering if Pike's men would come knocking with new demands or old grievances. I need information, he said. Pike's reinforcements. When exactly are they arriving? 6 days now, maybe 5. The riders he sent came back this morning. They confirmed the men from Deadwood and Silver Creek are coming. Sarah set down her broom. 42 guns, plus Pike's 19. That's 61 men against 1. 61 men who have to sleep, eat, and stay supplied in hostile territory. This is Pike's territory. Is it? Rhett turned to face her. He controls the town. But the desert, the canyons, the places where water flows and supplies have to travel? He shook his head. That's nobody's territory. That's just land. And land doesn't care about money or fear or who claims to own it. Sarah studied him in the dim light, seeing something that made her breath catch. You're not trying to beat him in a fight. You're trying to make it impossible for him to stay. A town this size can't support 60 men. Not for long. They'll bleed the place dry in weeks, maybe days. Food, water, ammunition, all of it has to come from somewhere. And every supply line is a vulnerability. You're going to starve them out. I'm going to make Pike choose between keeping his army fed or keeping his pride intact. Rhett's smile was thin, cold, and I'm betting pride wins. It always does with men like him. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. The town well is good, but not good enough for 60 men. They'll need the spring at Blackstone Ridge. They will. Which you've been watching. Which I've been learning. She laughed then, a sound brittle as winter ice. My father tried to outfight Pike. You're trying to outthink him. I don't know if that's brilliant or suicidal. Can it be both? Before Sarah could answer, the sound of shouting erupted from the direction of the saloon. Both of them tensed, hands moving instinctively toward weapons that weren't there. The shouting grew louder, accompanied now by the sound of breaking glass and a woman's scream. Stay here, Rhett said, already moving toward the door. Like hell. They emerged from the church to find Main Street in chaos. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, and at its center, Cutter Doyle held a woman by the hair, her face already bleeding from where he'd struck her. Her husband, Chen, the shopkeeper Rhett had seen beaten that first day, was on the ground, 3 of Pike's men kicking him methodically, while others held back the gathering crowd. This is what happens, Cutter was shouting, his voice carrying across the street, when people forget their place, when they think some drifter's going to save them. He yanked the woman's head back, exposing her throat. Mr. Pike wants everyone to understand something. We own this town. We own you. And nobody's changing that. Rhett was moving before he'd made a conscious decision, cutting through the crowd with Sarah trying to grab his arm, to pull him back, to stop him from doing what they both knew he was about to do. Calder, don't... But he was already there, stepping into the circle, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Let her go, Cutter. The big man turned and his battered face split into a grin. His nose was still bandaged from their first encounter, both eyes ringed with fading bruises, but his eagerness for violence hadn't diminished. Well, well, the hero appears. You want to make this your problem? It's already my problem. Everything in this town is my problem. Big words from a man who's about to bleed. Cutter shoved the woman away. She stumbled into the crowd where willing hands caught her. You got lucky last time. Caught me by surprise. But I've been thinking about you, Calder. Thinking about all the things I'm going to do to you. Thinking's probably hard for you. Don't strain yourself. Cutter's grin evaporated. You just made a mistake. Not the first time today. The crowd was backing up now, giving them room, that same awful anticipation from before settling over the street. Pike's men released Chen, who crawled toward the boardwalk, coughing blood. The whole town held its breath, but before Cutter could move, a voice cut through the tension. Enough! Pike stepped out of the saloon, immaculate as always, his pale eyes taking in the scene with detached interest. He looked at Cutter, at Rhett, at the crowd, and his expression suggested mild disappointment, like a teacher who'd caught students fighting in the schoolyard. Cutter, I believe I told you to make a point, not start a war. He descended the steps slowly. And Mr. Calder, I'm beginning to think you enjoy these dramatic confrontations. It's almost like you're looking for excuses. Just happened to be walking by. How convenient! Pike moved between them, hands clasped behind his back. Gentlemen, I think we've provided enough entertainment for one evening. Cutter, have the doctor see to Mr. and Mrs. Chen. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. But, boss, did I stutter? Cutter's jaw worked, but he nodded, backing down. Pike's men helped Chen to his feet, surprisingly gentle now, following orders. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring, confused by the sudden de-escalation. Pike turned to Rhett, and for the first time his smile didn't reach his eyes at all. Walk with me, mister. Calder. It wasn't a request. They walked in silence to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to desert and the night sky opened up infinite and indifferent above them. Pike stopped at the boundary, looking out at the darkness. You're an interesting problem, he said finally. Most men I can understand. They want money, power, women, revenge. Simple motivations that lead to predictable actions. But you? He glanced at Rhett. I can't figure out what you want. Peace and quiet. Liar. Men who want peace don't pick fights with my lieutenants. Don't interfere with my business. Don't, he paused, sabotage my supply lines. So Pike had figured it out, or at least suspected. Rhett's expression didn't change. Don't know what you're talking about. The wagon, the Apache signs. Very clever. Had me worried for about an hour before I realized Apaches don't operate that far north. Don't leave markers that obvious, and don't cut horses loose without stealing them. Pike's smile returned. You're good, Mr. Calder. Better than most, but not good enough to fool me. If you think I had something to do with your wagon, prove it. I don't need to prove anything. This isn't a court of law. This is my town. Pike turned to face him fully. Here's what I think. I think you're not just some drifter. I think you've got training, experience, maybe a past you're running from. I think you looked at Ashfall and saw something worth fighting for, which makes you either noble or stupid. Already established I'm stupid. Yes, you did. By staying, Pike's voice hardened. My reinforcements arrive in 5 days. 42 of the meanest, most vicious killers I could find. Men who make Cutter look gentle. Men who'll burn this town to bedrock just for the fun of it if I give the word. Sounds expensive. Extremely. Which is why you're going to leave before they arrive, and I'm going to let you. Call it professional courtesy, one tactician to another. Rhett let the silence stretch, considering. Pike was offering him an out, a way to walk away with his life and his pride mostly intact. It was more than most men in his position would get. What about the town? He asked. What about it? They'll go back to how things were, compliant, productive, profitable. Pike shrugged. The people here don't want freedom, Mr. Calder. They want survival. You're confusing the two. Maybe. Or maybe they just need to remember what freedom looks like. Is that what you're selling? Freedom? Pike laughed, genuine amusement in the sound. You can't give people freedom. They have to take it themselves. And these people? He gestured back toward the town. They gave up that fight 3 years ago. People can change. No, Mr. Calder, they can't. Not really. The coward stays a coward. The brave stay brave. And the sheep, he smiled, the sheep stay sheep, no matter how much they bleat about wolves. You really believe that? I've built a career on it. Pike started walking back toward town. 5 days, Mr. Calder. After that, I can't guarantee your safety. After that, you're just another body for the desert to claim. He left Rhett standing at the town's edge, his warning delivered, his offer made. Rhett watched him go, then turned back to the darkness, to the vast emptiness where he'd spent the last week learning every secret the land would share. 5 days. It wasn't much time, but it was enough. When he returned to the stable, he found Sarah waiting in his room, pacing like a caged animal. Pike's leaving, she said immediately, tomorrow morning. He's taking 10 men and heading to Copperhead to meet the reinforcements personally, escort them back. That leaves 9 men in town. Rhett's mind seized on this information, turned it over, examined it from every angle. Pike leaving the town with half his force. That was opportunity, risk, and trap all rolled into one. How do you know this? Marcus heard them talking. They're not being quiet about it. Pike wants everyone to know he's bringing an army back. 9 men, Rhett repeated. Cutter stays? He's in charge while Pike's gone, him and Shaw. Rhett moved to the window, looking out at the sleeping town. 9 men. For 4 days, maybe 5, Ashfall would be guarded by only 9 of Pike's killers instead of 19. The smart move would be to run, like Pike suggested. The cautious move would be to wait, see what happened, avoid action that might get people killed. But Rhett had stopped making smart moves the moment he decided to stay. I need you to do something for me, he said to Sarah. Something dangerous. I'm listening. Tomorrow, while Pike's gone, I need you to gather the people you trust, the ones who might actually fight if given the chance. Not everyone, just the ones with steel in their spines. How many are we talking about? However many you can find. 6, 8, a dozen, if we're lucky. He turned to face her. Can you do that without tipping off Cutter's men? Sarah's eyes were bright with something that might have been fear or excitement, or both. What are you planning? To give Pike a reason to leave his reinforcements in Copperhead and come back alone. That's insane. Probably, but if it works, we cut his army in half before it ever gets here. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. My father used to say the difference between bravery and stupidity is whether you survive. I guess we'll find out which this is. I guess we will. The next morning, Pike assembled his escort in front of the saloon, making a show of it, letting the town see his strength. 10 men, all heavily armed, all radiating confidence and casual cruelty. Pike himself looked like he was heading to a social event rather than a desert crossing. Clean clothes, polished boots, that red vest bright as fresh blood. Mr. Cutter, he called out, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. You're in charge until I return. Keep things orderly. Keep people in line. If Mr. Calder causes any problems... He paused, looking directly at Rhett, who stood in the stable doorway watching. Use your best judgment. Just save some of him for me. Cutter grinned. My pleasure, boss. Pike mounted his horse with easy grace, and the column rode out, heading north toward Copperhead and the army that waited there. The town watched them go in silence, and Rhett could feel the shift in the air, part relief, part dread, all uncertainty. This was the moment, the window he'd been waiting for. He caught Sarah's eye across the street. She nodded once, then disappeared into Chen's shop. The gathering had begun. Rhett spent the morning being visible, making a show of normalcy. He worked on the stable roof, bought supplies from the general store, even sat on the porch for a while, whittling a piece of wood into nothing in particular. All the while, Cutter's remaining men watched him, cataloging his movements, looking for the trap they knew had to be coming. But Rhett just whittled and worked and waited. Around noon, he saddled his horse and rode out of town heading east toward Scorpion Flats. The guards watched him go, but didn't follow. 9 men weren't enough to spare anyone for surveillance, not when they had to keep the whole town locked down, which was exactly what Rhett had counted on. He rode for an hour, then circled back through rough country, approaching Ashfall from the south. He cached his horse in a gully where it wouldn't be seen and continued on foot, moving through the scrub and rock with the patience of a man who'd learned to be invisible. By mid-afternoon, he'd reached his destination, a position overlooking Blackstone Ridge and the spring where Pike's supplies waited under guard. The two men stationed there were the same ones he'd observed before, following the same routine. The noon shift change had just occurred, which meant the day guard would be alert for another hour or so before boredom and heat took their edge. Rhett settled in to wait, the sun beating down like a hammer, sweat soaking his clothes. This part was always the hardest, the stillness, the patience, the absolute commitment to doing nothing until the exact right moment. He thought about Pike's offer, about walking away. Part of him, the smart part, the part that had kept him alive through a dozen similar situations, whispered that it wasn't too late. He could still mount his horse, ride west, leave Ashfall to its fate. But then he thought about Chen's grin, about Sarah's brittle hope, about a town that had forgotten what it felt like to stand up. Some things were worth the risk. As the sun began its descent, Rhett made his move. He'd cached supplies here 2 days ago, oil, rags, certain chemicals that became very useful when mixed properly. He assembled them now with practiced efficiency, creating something that would burn hot and bright and be visible for miles. Then he crept closer to the supply cache, using every scrap of cover, every shadow. The guards were on the far side of the spring, sharing tobacco and complaints. They never saw him place the charges, never heard him retreat back into the rocks. Rhett found a position with good sight lines and settled in to wait for full dark. The sun set in its usual spectacular fashion, painting the desert in colors that had no names. The guards lit their fire, cooked their evening meal, settled into the routine of another boring night of guard duty. At full dark, Rhett lit the first fuse. The explosion, when it came, was spectacular. The carefully placed charges detonated in sequence, sending flames shooting 50 feet into the air. The supply cache, ammunition, gunpowder, whiskey, all of Pike's carefully hoarded reserves, went up like Judgment Day. The guards were shouting, running toward the flames, trying to salvage what they could, but the fire was too hot, spreading too fast, consuming everything. Rhett didn't wait to watch. He was already moving, racing back to where he'd left his horse, mounting up and riding hard for Ashfall. Behind him, Blackstone Ridge burned like a signal fire, visible for 20 miles in every direction. Pike would see it. His reinforcements would see it. Everyone for miles would see it and know that someone had just destroyed the gang's entire supply depot. And they'd all wonder the same thing. If one man could do that, what else could he do? Rhett reached Ashfall near midnight, exhausted and filthy with smoke. The stable-keeper was waiting, his face pale. "The whole town saw the flames," he said. "Cutter's men are going crazy trying to figure out what happened. They're saying it was you, saying they're going to burn the town down to flush you out." "Where's Cutter now?" "Saloon, with all his men. They're drinking, working themselves up." "Good. Let them drink. Drunk men make mistakes." Rhett dismounted, started rubbing down his horse. "Sarah, gather anyone?" 12 people, waiting in the church like you asked. Mr. Calder," the old man's voice cracked. "What are you doing? What's your plan?" "To show Pike that taking this town isn't worth what it's going to cost him." Rhett finished with his horse, checked his rifle, his pistol. "To make him realize that every day he stays here, he bleeds money and supplies and men. To turn his army into a liability instead of an asset. And if it doesn't work, then I die trying, and you all go back to how things were." Rhett started toward the church, then paused. "But it's going to work, because Pike's made one critical mistake." "What's that?" "He thinks this is about me, about one man against his gang." Rhett's smile was cold in the moonlight. "But it's not. It's about a town that's ready to stop being afraid." At the church, he found them waiting, 12 souls who'd answered Sarah's call. Chen was there, his face still bruised but his eyes bright with determination. The baker, a woman named Rose, who'd lost her husband to Pike's men 2 years back. Marcus, the wagon driver, looking terrified but committed. Others Rhett didn't know, but whose presence spoke volumes. Sarah stood at the front, and when Rhett entered, every eye turned to him. "You all saw the fire," he said without preamble. "That was Pike's supply depot. Everything he stored up to feed his army when it arrives, gone, burned, turned to ash. Murmurs rippled through the group. Chen actually laughed, a sound of pure vindictive joy. Pike's going to come back here mad as hell, Rhett continued. He's going to want blood, but here's the thing. He can't afford to destroy this town. Not anymore. Because without his supplies, without the infrastructure to support 60 men, Ashfall is all he's got. Burn it down, and he's got nothing. So what do we do? Rose asked. We wait. We watch. And when Pike comes back, when he tries to reassert control, we show him that this town isn't his anymore. Rhett looked at each of them in turn. I'm not asking you to fight. Not yet. I'm asking you to be ready, to not bow down, to stand up when the moment comes. And when is that moment? Marcus asked, his voice shaking slightly. You'll know it when you see it. They talked for another hour, going over scenarios, establishing signals, making sure everyone understood their role. It wasn't much of a plan, more of a framework, a structure to hang hope on. But it was enough. As the meeting broke up, Sarah pulled Rhett aside. Pike's going to know it was you. When he sees that fire, when his men tell him what happened, let him know. I want him to know. Why? Because angry men make mistakes, and I'm going to need Pike to make a lot of mistakes before this is over. They stood in the darkness of the church, surrounded by empty pews and memories of better days. Outside, somewhere in the night, Cutter's men were drinking and plotting. And north, riding hard toward Copperhead, Pike was about to get news that would turn his careful plans to ashes. The game had changed. The hunter was becoming the hunted. And Rhett Calder was just getting started. The messenger reached Pike just after dawn, his horse half dead from the night ride, foam dripping from its mouth. Pike was sharing breakfast with his escort at a way station 20 miles north of Ashfall when the rider came thundering in, nearly falling from the saddle in his haste. "Boss," the man gasped, still catching his breath. "Blackstone Ridge, the whole cache. It's gone." Pike set down his coffee with careful precision, his expression unchanging. Around him, his men stopped eating, hands drifting toward weapons. "Gone," Pike repeated softly. "Define gone. Burned, exploded, everything, the ammunition, the supplies, all of it, just ash now." For a long moment, Pike said nothing. The only sound was the messenger's ragged breathing and somewhere in the distance, a hawk's cry. Then Pike smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. How many men did it take? How big was the raiding party? The messenger swallowed hard. They didn't see anyone, boss. Just explosions. Fire. By the time the guards could react, it was all burning. 2 guards, Pike said, his voice still eerily calm. And they saw nothing, heard nothing, until the whole depot exploded. Yes, sir. They said it had to be Apaches, or maybe it wasn't Apaches. Pike stood, brushing dust from his vest with meticulous care. It was one man, one clever, suicidal man who just signed his death warrant, and everyone else is in Ashfall. He turned to his lieutenant, a scarred veteran named Reese, who'd been with him since the beginning. "We're turning back, now. Send a rider ahead to Copperhead. Tell the reinforcements to hold position. I'll send word when I need them." "Boss, shouldn't we bring them with us? Hit Ashfall with everything we've got?" "And feed them with what?" Pike's voice cracked like a whip. "Calder just burned our supplies. 60 men eat a lot, Reese. They drink a lot. They need ammunition, shelter, basic provisions, all of which I no longer have." He began pacing, his tactical mind already reassessing, recalculating. "No, we go back with what we have. We end this quickly, decisively, and we make it memorable. Then, only then, do we bring in the reinforcements to hold what's left." "What about Calder?" Pike's smile returned. "Mr. Calder thinks he's being clever, thinks he's disrupting my supply lines, making this too expensive to maintain. What he doesn't understand is that I don't need supplies to destroy one man and a town full of cowards." He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "We ride hard. I want to be back in Ashfall by tomorrow night." The column wheeled around and headed south, pushing their horses hard, leaving dust and determination in their wake. Back in Ashfall, Rhett woke to the sound of hammering. He looked out his window to see Chen and 3 other men working on the burned-out shell of the old hotel, the one where the hostages were kept. They were reinforcing the door, adding bars to the windows. "What are they doing?" Rhett asked the stable-keeper when he descended. The old man's face was grave. "Making it harder for Cutter to use those boys as leverage. It was Sarah's idea. If we're going to stand up, we need to protect the ones who can't protect themselves." "Cutter see this yet?" "He's still sleeping off last night's drunk. But when he wakes up—" The stable-keeper shook his head. "This is going to get ugly, Mr. Calder." "It was always going to get ugly." Rhett checked his weapons, made sure everything was loaded and ready. "Question is whether we get ugly first or wait for them to bring it to us." The answer came around mid-morning when Cutter emerged from the saloon, saw what was happening at the hotel, and exploded. "What the hell is this?" he roared, storming across the street with 4 of his men. "Who authorized this? Who gave you permission to touch that building?" Chen straightened from his work, hammer still in hand, and met Cutter's glare without flinching. "We're just making repairs. Building's falling apart." "Those are my prisoners in there." "They're children, and this is our town." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Cutter's face went red, then purple. His hand dropped to the knife at his belt. "Your town?" He laughed, ugly and mean. "Boy, this hasn't been your town in 3 years. This is Mr. Pike's town. You're just living in it on borrowed time." "Maybe we're tired of borrowing." The crowd that had gathered gasped. Chen's wife tried to pull him back, but he stood firm, his small frame somehow seeming larger, more solid. Cutter drew his knife. "You want to die over some hammering? That what this is?" "No," came a voice from behind him. "He wants to live like a man instead of dying like a dog." Rhett stepped out from the alley where he'd been watching, his hand resting on his pistol grip. The morning sun was at his back, putting him in silhouette, making it hard to see his face, but easy to see his intent. Cutter spun, and for a moment fear flickered across his features before rage smothered it. You're behind this, all of it." "I'm just watching some men fix a building." "The fire, the supplies, everything." Cutter advanced, knife still drawn. "Pike was right. You're the problem, and I'm going to solve you right here, right now." "With a knife? You remember how our last fight went?" "This time I ain't fighting fair." Cutter lunged, the blade flashing in the sunlight, but he'd telegraphed the move, broadcasting his intention, and Rhett was already moving. He sidestepped, caught Cutter's wrist, and twisted hard. The knife clattered to the dirt. Before Cutter could recover, Rhett had his pistol out and pressed against the big man's temple. "Here's what's going to happen," Rhett said quietly, his voice carrying to every witness. "You're going to back off. You and your men are going to go back to the saloon, and you're going to wait for Pike to come back and tell you what to do. Because right now, you're outnumbered. The hell we are, there's 5 of us and 1 of you. Look around, Cutter." Cutter did, and his face went pale. The crowd that had gathered wasn't just watching anymore. They'd moved in, forming a loose circle, and many of them held tools that could double as weapons. Hammers, axes, pitchforks. Even old Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house had a cast-iron skillet. "You're going to let a bunch of townies scare you?" one of Cutter's men asked, but his voice lacked confidence. "They ain't scared anymore," Cutter said slowly, realization dawning. "That's the problem. They ain't scared." Rhett released him, stepped back, holstered his pistol. "Get out of here, while you still can." For a moment it could have gone either way. Cutter's pride warred with his survival instinct, his hatred of Rhett battling with the reality of the situation. Finally, survival won. "This ain't over," he growled, backing away. When Pike gets back, he'll find a town that's done taking orders." Rhett's voice was steel. "Now get." Cutter and his men retreated to the saloon, muttering threats but not making good on any of them. The crowd held formation until they were gone, then slowly dispersed, returning to their work but carrying themselves differently now, straighter, prouder. Sarah appeared at Rhett's elbow. "You just declared war." "War was already declared. I just made it official." Cutter's going to barricade himself in the saloon with his men, wait for Pike to return. "Let him. A man in a fortress is a man who's already lost." Rhett looked around at the town, seeing it with new eyes. "How many guns do we have? Real guns, not just hunting rifles." Maybe a dozen. Pistols, rifles, 1 shotgun, not much ammunition." Then we make every shot count. He turned to her. The hostages. Can you get them out of that hotel without Cutter knowing? Maybe. Why? Because when Pike comes back, I want him to find a town that's taken back everything he thought he owned, including those boys. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Sarah organized a rotation to watch the saloon, making sure Cutter's men stayed contained. Chen and his crew finished reinforcing the hotel, then quietly began moving the hostages out through a back window, spiriting them to various homes throughout the town. Rhett, meanwhile, prepared the battlefield. He knew Pike would come back angry, would come back ready to crush resistance with overwhelming force. But anger made people predictable, and predictable enemies could be defeated. He walked the perimeter of Ashfall, identifying defensive positions, fields of fire, places where a few determined people could hold off many. The town wasn't built for defense. Most frontier towns weren't, but it had potential. Narrow alleys that favored defenders, buildings with good sightlines, a layout that could be turned into a maze if you knew what you were doing. And Rhett knew exactly what he was doing. As sunset approached, Marcus came running from his post on the northern edge of town. "Riders," he gasped, "maybe 2 miles out, coming fast." "How many?" "Couldn't tell for sure. Dust cloud looks big. 10 men, maybe more." Pike's back. Rhett checked his weapons one last time. "Everyone to positions, just like we practiced." The word spread quickly, quietly. People disappeared into buildings, into alleys, taking up the positions Rhett had assigned them. Within minutes, Ashfall looked deserted, a ghost town waiting for its ghosts to arrive. Rhett positioned himself on the roof of the general store, rifle in hand, with a clear view of the main street. Sarah joined him, carrying her father's old Winchester. "You know this is insane," she said, checking the rifle's action. "You mentioned that before." "Felt worth repeating." They waited in the fading light, watching the dust cloud grow closer, resolve into individual riders. Pike at the lead, sitting his horse like a conquering general, his face set in hard lines. 10 men with him, all armed, all looking ready for violence. The column rode into town and stopped in the middle of the main street. Pike dismounted slowly, taking his time, his eyes scanning the buildings with the attention of a man who knew something was wrong. "Interesting," he said to no one in particular. "Very interesting." Cutter emerged from the saloon looking relieved and anxious in equal measure. "Boss, thank the—" he started, but Pike silenced him with a raised hand. "Where is everyone, Cutter?" "In their homes. Locked down. Ever since this morning when Calder—" "When Calder what?" Cutter swallowed. When they stood up, the townies. They got brave all of a sudden." Pike's smile was cold. "Brave? How quaint." He raised his voice, projecting it to carry to every building, every hidden listener. "Mr. Calder, I know you can hear me. Why don't you come down and we can discuss this like civilized men?" Rhett stood up on the rooftop, making himself visible, rifle held casually but ready. "Nothing to discuss, Pike. You're done here." "Done," Pike laughed. "I just rode back with reinforcements. I've got 20 men now. You've got, what, a dozen townspeople with farming tools and delusions? I've got a town that's not afraid of you anymore. That's worth more than 20 guns." "We'll see." Pike gestured to his men. "Spread out. Search every building. I want Calder alive. I have special plans for him. But anyone else who resists, feel free to make examples of them." The men began to dismount, to spread out, reaching for weapons. This was the moment, the point where talk ended and lead started flying. Rhett raised his rifle. "Pike, last chance. Take your men and ride out. Leave Ashfall, and we'll let you go in peace." "You'll let me?" Pike's face twisted with rage. "This is my town. Mine. I built this." "You built nothing. You just took, and now we're taking it back." Pike's hand dropped to his pistol. Time seemed to slow, to thicken like honey. Rhett could see every detail with crystalline clarity. The way Pike's fingers wrapped around the grip, the tension in his shoulders, the calculation in those pale eyes, deciding whether to draw or retreat. Then a shot rang out from somewhere in town. Not Rhett's rifle, not Pike's pistol. Someone else firing at one of Pike's men who'd gotten too close to the hotel. The shot missed, but it broke the standoff like shattering glass. Pike's men scattered, diving for cover, returning fire toward where they thought the shot had originated. The town exploded with noise, gunfire, shouting, the crash of breaking glass. Rhett fired once, aiming for Pike, but the gang leader was already moving, rolling behind a water trough with surprising agility. The bullet sparked off stone where his head had been a second before. "Defensive positions," Rhett shouted, "just like we planned." The 12 townspeople he'd recruited opened up from their hiding spots, not aiming to kill, but to suppress, to keep Pike's men pinned down and scattered. It was chaos, smoke and noise and confusion, exactly what Rhett had wanted. In chaos, numbers mattered less than position and preparation. He fired twice more, keeping Pike's head down, then dropped back below the roofline as return fire chewed chunks out of the wood where he'd been standing. "Sarah, go! Get to position 2. She nodded and scrambled toward the back of the building, heading for her next assigned location. Rhett followed, using the rooftops to move unseen, repositioning, keeping Pike's men guessing about where the fire was coming from. Below, the street had become a war zone. Pike's men had taken cover behind buildings, water troughs, anywhere that offered protection. But they were in the open, in unfamiliar territory, while the townspeople knew every inch of Ashfall. Chen appeared in a second-story window, fired twice with an old pistol, then ducked back as bullets tore through the wall where he'd been. Rose the baker threw a lit bundle of rags from an alley, not hitting anyone but forcing Pike's men to scatter from their cover. It wasn't professional, it wasn't coordinated, but it was effective. "Burn them out!" Pike screamed from behind his trough. "Fire! Use fire!" One of his men produced a torch, lit it from a match, and threw it at the nearest building. It was the general store, dry wood that would burn fast and hot. Rhett saw it happen, saw the flames catch, saw the fire begin to spread. He made a decision. Dropping from the roof, he sprinted across the street in full view of Pike's men, drawing their fire, absorbing their attention. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet, one grazing his arm, but he made it to the burning building. Inside, the storekeeper's family was trapped on the second floor, screaming. Rhett kicked open the door and plunged into the smoke. The heat hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Fire was already climbing the walls, eating through dry wood like it was paper. He could hear screaming from above. The family, trapped, probably blocked by flames. He found the stairs, tested them, felt them start to give. No choice. He ran up them anyway, wood cracking under his weight, smoke so thick he could barely see. At the top he found them, the storekeeper, his wife, 2 small children, huddled in a corner, surrounded by flames. "Window!" Rhett shouted over the roar of fire. "We go out the window!" "Too high," the storekeeper wailed. "We'll break our legs." "Better than burning." He smashed the window with his rifle butt, knocked out the remaining glass, looked down. 20 feet to the ground, but Sarah was there with others, already positioning a wagon loaded with hay directly below. "Jump! I'll catch the children." The storekeeper stared at him like he was insane. "Now!" Rhett roared. Something in his voice, in his eyes, convinced the man. He grabbed his daughter, held her out the window, and dropped her. Rhett watched her fall, saw Sarah catch her, cushion the impact. The son went next, then the wife, both landing safely in the hay. The storekeeper hesitated at the window's edge. Behind them, the stairs collapsed in a shower of sparks. The fire was consuming the room, seconds from flashover. "Jump or die!" Rhett shouted. The man jumped. Rhett followed immediately, hitting the hay wagon hard, rolling with the impact, coming up coughing smoke but alive. Around them, the battle still raged. Pike's men were regrouping, forming a defensive line. But they'd been rattled, scattered, forced to react instead of act. "Fall back!" Pike was shouting. "To the saloon! Defensive position!" His men retreated in reasonably good order, laying down covering fire, making it to the saloon and barricading themselves inside. Within minutes, they'd turned the building into a fortress. The shooting tapered off, stopped. Silence fell over Ashfall, broken only by the crackle of flames consuming the general store. Rhett did a quick head count of his people. Chen had taken a bullet in the shoulder but was still moving. Marcus was bleeding from a scalp wound but grinning like a maniac. Everyone else was shaken but intact. On Pike's side, 2 men lay in the street, one clearly dead, the other wounded and groaning. The rest were in the saloon, trapped but protected. Sarah appeared at Rhett's side, soot-covered and wild-eyed. "We did it," she said, disbelief in her voice. We actually stood up to them. First round, Rhett corrected. Pike's not done. Not by a long shot. As if to prove his point, Pike's voice echoed from the saloon. Mr. Calder, impressive display. You've cost me 3 good men and shown these sheep they have teeth. But you've also trapped yourself. My reinforcements are a day's ride away. All I have to do is wait them out, and you've got 42 fresh guns coming to kill everyone you've convinced to fight. Rhett didn't answer. He was already thinking 3 moves ahead, planning the next phase. You hear me, Calder? You can't win this. Best you can do is delay the inevitable. So here's my final offer. You walk away right now and I spare the town. I'll even let them keep their little moment of rebellion as a funny story. But you stay, and when my reinforcements arrive, I will burn Ashfall to bedrock. Every building, every person, everything. The town held its breath, waiting for Rhett's response. He looked around at these people who'd found their courage, at Chen clutching his wounded shoulder with pride in his eyes, at Sarah standing tall with her father's rifle, at all of them ready to fight for something they'd thought lost forever. Then he turned toward the saloon and called back. Your reinforcements aren't coming, Pike. Laughter from the saloon. The hell they're not. Think about it. Your supplies are gone. Your cash is ash. What are you going to feed 42 men? How are you going to arm them, house them, keep them supplied? Rhett's voice carried across the street, loud enough for everyone to hear. You can't afford them anymore. And even if you bring them anyway, I'll do to them what I did to your depot. Pick them off, burn their supplies, turn this whole territory into a nightmare that costs you more than it's worth. The silence from the saloon was longer this time. You're bluffing, Pike said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Am I? How much have you lost in the last week? The wagon? The supplies? 3 men tonight. How much more are you willing to lose over one town that's more trouble than it's worth? This isn't about worth. This is about respect. No, Pike. This is about pride. And pride is expensive. Question is, can you afford it? Another long silence. Then Pike's voice came back, different now, harder, but also more thoughtful. Here's what's going to happen, Calder. Tonight, we rest. Tomorrow, we settle this. You and me. No armies, no reinforcements, just 2 men who've been dancing around each other long enough. We fight, winner takes Ashfall, loser takes nothing. You'll honor that? If I win, you leave? If you win, I won't be in a position to stay. And if I win, Pike's smile was audible. Well, the town will need a reminder of what happens to rebellion. Rhett looked at Sarah, saw the fear and hope warring in her expression. Looked at Chen, at Marcus, at all of them waiting for his decision. This was what it came down to. Not armies or supplies or tactics, just 2 men and the question of who wanted it more. Tomorrow, Rhett called back. Noon, Main Street, bring whatever you want. Oh, I will, Mr. Calder, I will. The night that followed was the longest Ashfall had ever known. Pike's men stayed in the saloon, watching the street. The townspeople kept watch from their positions, too wired with adrenaline to sleep. Rhett sat on the church steps, cleaning his weapons, preparing for what was coming. Sarah found him there as midnight approached. You can't beat him in a straight fight, she said. Pike's a killer, professional. He's been doing this his whole life. I know. Then why agree to it? Because it's the only way to end this without getting everyone killed. Pike knows his reinforcements are a liability now. He knows every day he stays costs him, but he can't just leave. It would make him look weak. So we give him this, a way to save face while walking away. And if he kills you? Rhett looked up at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. Then you run. Take everyone who can move and head for the nearest town with Law. Don't try to fight, just survive. That's not acceptable. It's realistic. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a while they didn't speak, just sat in the darkness listening to Ashfall breathe around them. My father died believing in justice, Sarah said finally. Believing that standing up mattered, even if it got you killed. I watched him bleed out in that street, and I swore I'd never be that stupid, that I'd survive at any cost. She turned to look at Rhett. But you made me remember something. Some things are worth dying for. Some things are worth the cost. Freedom's one of them. Yeah, it is.
Dawn came too quickly, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Rhett rose, stretched muscles tight from fighting and falling, and checked his weapons one final time. The town woke slowly, people emerging from buildings to stand in doorways, on porches, watching as the morning light crept across Main Street. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. At 11:30, Pike emerged from the saloon. He'd cleaned up, changed clothes, looked fresh as if he'd slept in a feather bed instead of a besieged building. He wore his black suit with that red vest, and at his hip, 2 pistols in tooled leather holsters. He walked to the center of the street and waited. Rhett checked the sun, 15 minutes to noon.
He stepped off the church steps and began walking toward his fate, each footfall deliberate, measured. The whole town held its breath. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. One way or another, it ended here, in fire, blood, and final reckoning. They met in the center of Main Street with the sun climbing toward its zenith, 2 men separated by 20 paces and a chasm of intent. The dust beneath their boots was the same dust that had witnessed Sheriff Holloway's death 3 years prior, the same dust that had soaked up the blood of men who dared to resist. Now it waited to drink again. Pike stood relaxed, almost casual, his hands loose at his sides. But Rhett could see the coiled tension in his shoulders, the predator's stillness that preceded the strike. This was a man who'd killed before, who knew the rhythm of violence like a familiar song. "I've been thinking about you all night," Pike said conversationally, as if they were discussing weather. "Trying to understand what makes a man like you tick. You're not from around here. You've got training, military maybe, or something close to it. You know tactics, strategy, how to use terrain and psychology as weapons." He tilted his head. "So what are you really? A deserter? An outlaw? A man running from something worse than me? Does it matter? Professionally? No. But I'm curious. It's not every day I meet someone competent enough to cause me this much trouble." Rhett's eyes flicked to the roof lines, the windows, checking positions. Pike's men were visible in the saloon windows, rifles ready. The townspeople were scattered throughout the buildings on the opposite side, armed with whatever they'd found. One spark, and this whole street would erupt. "Here's what I think," Pike continued. "I think you're a man with nothing left to lose. No home, no family, no future. Just a ghost drifting from town to town, looking for somewhere to matter, and you thought Ashfall could be that place." He smiled. "Am I close?" "You talk a lot for a man about to die." "Confidence, not the same as talking." Pike's smile widened. "But you're right. We should get to it. I have an empire to salvage after all." "You mean the one I burned down?" "Temporary setback. I've lost worse and rebuilt stronger. You, on the other hand," Pike's eyes hardened, "you won't be rebuilding anything." The church bell began to toll. 1, 2, 3, marking noon with iron certainty. On the 12th stroke, Pike drew. He was fast. Faster than Cutter, faster than anyone Rhett had faced in recent memory. Both pistols came up in a smooth, practiced motion, hammers already cocking, fingers finding triggers with the ease of long habit. But Rhett had been watching Pike's eyes, not his hands. He'd learned long ago that the eyes betrayed the draw a fraction of a second before the hands moved. It was the difference between life and death. He threw himself sideways as Pike fired, both pistols thundering in near-perfect unison. The bullets cracked through the space where Rhett had been standing, one close enough to tug at his vest. Rhett's own pistol came out as he rolled, and he fired from the ground, aiming for center mass. Pike twisted, incredibly agile for a man his age, and the bullet caught his shoulder instead of his chest. He grunted, stumbled back a step, but kept both guns up and firing. The street exploded with noise. Not just Pike and Rhett, but everyone. Pike's men opening up from the saloon, the townspeople returning fire, the whole careful standoff shattering into chaos. Rhett scrambled behind a water trough as bullets chewed up the dirt around him. He could hear Sarah screaming orders, Chen shouting defiance, the crack and boom of gunfire echoing off buildings. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This was supposed to be just him and Pike, one-on-one. But of course Pike had never intended to honor that arrangement. He just needed Rhett in the open, exposed, vulnerable. "Burn them!" Pike was shouting, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder while the other still held a pistol. "Burn everything! I want this town ash by sunset!" His men were already moving, throwing torches, spreading fire. The same tactic that had nearly worked before, now deployed with systematic brutality. Buildings caught fast in the dry heat, flames racing up walls, consuming wood that had weathered too many harsh seasons. Rhett fired twice more at Pike, but the gang leader had found cover behind a thick support post. He returned fire, forcing Rhett to keep his head down. "Fall back!" Rhett shouted to the townspeople. Get to the north end! Don't let them surround you!" But the fire was spreading too fast, cutting off escape routes, funneling everyone toward the center of town where Pike's men could pin them down. Smoke billowed thick and black, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. Chen appeared at Rhett's side, his wounded shoulder bleeding freely, his face set with grim determination. "We can't hold," he gasped. "Too many fires, too many guns." "Then we change the game." Rhett's mind raced, calculating, discarding options. The fires were spreading from the east and west, pushing everyone toward the center. But fires needed fuel, and beyond the town limits was nothing but dirt and rock. He grabbed Chen's good arm. "The well, can you get to it?" "Maybe." "Why?" "Because Pike's men need water as much as we do. And if we control the well, we control whether they burn with us or run." Understanding flashed in Chen's eyes. He nodded and scrambled away, keeping low, moving through smoke and chaos toward the town square where the well stood. Rhett turned his attention back to Pike, who was reloading his pistols with practiced efficiency, despite his wounded shoulder. "You can't win this, Calder," Pike called out. "Even if you kill me, my men will finish what I started. Ashfall dies today one way or another." "You first!" Rhett broke from cover, not toward Pike but away, sprinting through an alley while bullets chased him. He heard Pike cursing, shouting orders, men scrambling to cut him off. But Rhett wasn't running away. He was running toward. He burst into the back of the old hotel, the one where the hostages had been kept. The building was empty now, the boys long since evacuated, but it had something Rhett needed: height. He took the stairs 3 at a time, reached the second floor, then found the ladder to the roof. From up here, he could see the whole battle spread out below. The fires burning in a rough semicircle, Pike's men using the flames to herd the townspeople into kill zones. Sarah and her group were pinned down behind the bakery, taking fire from 3 directions. Marcus and others were trapped in the general store, or what was left of it. And in the center of it all, Pike stood directing his men with the calm efficiency of a general who knew he'd already won. Rhett took aim with his rifle, compensating for distance and wind. Pike was partially covered, but there was a gap, a moment when he'd have to expose himself to shout orders. Rhett waited, breath steady, finger on the trigger. There. Pike turned, mouth opening to call out to Cutter. Rhett fired. The bullet caught Pike in the side, spinning him around, dropping him to one knee. His men rushed to him, creating a protective cluster, shouting in confusion and rage. But Rhett was already moving, descending from the roof, heading for his next position. He had to keep them off balance, had to maintain pressure even as the fires closed in. He reached the ground level and nearly ran into Cutter, who'd been searching the building. They froze, staring at each other for a heartbeat, then both men grabbed for weapons. Rhett was closer. His fist caught Cutter in the throat, a brutal strike that crushed windpipe and sent the big man staggering back, gasping. Rhett followed with an elbow to the temple, then grabbed Cutter's knife from its sheath and drove it into the man's thigh. Cutter screamed, collapsing, clutching at the wound. Rhett kicked his gun away and kept moving. Outside, the situation had deteriorated further. The fires were merging, creating walls of flame that were boxing everyone in. The heat was intense, searing, making it hard to think. Then Rhett heard it, a creaking, groaning sound that meant structural failure. One of the burning buildings was coming down. "Move! Everyone move!" he screamed, but it was too late. The building collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning timber, crashing across Main Street and cutting the town in half. On one side, Pike and most of his men. On the other, Rhett and the majority of the townspeople. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then Pike started laughing, a harsh, pained sound that carried over the roar of flames. "Perfect. Now I just have to wait for you to cook or suffocate. Either way, this ends my way." But Chen had reached the well. And as Rhett watched, the shopkeeper did something brilliant and terrible. He threw a lit torch down into it. The explosion that followed wasn't huge, but it was enough. The well had accumulated gas over the years, pockets of methane from decomposing organic matter. The fire ignited it, sending a gout of flame shooting up from the well like a geyser. More importantly, it collapsed part of the well shaft, contaminating the water, making it undrinkable. Pike saw it happen, understood immediately what it meant. Without the well, without water to fight the fires or sustain his men, staying meant death. "Fall back," he screamed. "To the horses! We're leaving!" His men didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled for their mounts, some throwing down weapons in their haste to escape the inferno that Ashfall was becoming. But Rhett wasn't about to let Pike walk away. Not after everything. He ran through the flames, dodging falling debris, feeling his skin blister from the heat. He could see Pike ahead, being helped onto a horse by one of his men, clutching his wounded side. "Pike!" Rhett roared. The gang leader turned, saw Rhett coming through the fire like something born from it, and his eyes widened. He fumbled for his pistol, but his injured shoulder made him slow. Rhett crashed into him, dragging them both from the horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling, trading blows in the dirt and ash. Pike was wounded but desperate, fighting with the feral intensity of a cornered animal. He got a hand on Rhett's throat, squeezing, thumb digging for the windpipe. Rhett drove his knee into Pike's wounded side. The gang leader screamed, his grip loosening. Rhett broke free, gasping, and delivered a hammering blow to Pike's jaw that snapped his head back. Pike fell, stunned, blood streaming from his mouth. Rhett stood over him, breathing hard, every muscle screaming. "It's over," Rhett said. "Ashfall's over. Your gang's over. All of it." Pike spat blood. "You think this changes anything? There are 100 towns like Ashfall, 100 men like me. You saved nothing." "I saved this town. Today. That's enough." He raised his pistol, aiming at Pike's head. His finger tightened on the trigger, but Sarah's voice cut through the roar of flames. "Don't!" She was there suddenly, soot-covered and exhausted, her father's Winchester in her hands, but pointed at the ground. "Don't make yourself into him," she said. "He's beaten. Let him crawl away. Let him live with that." Rhett's hand shook. Every instinct screamed to pull the trigger, to end this permanently. Pike was a disease, a poison that would spread again if given the chance. But Sarah was right. Becoming Pike to defeat Pike meant Pike won anyway. He lowered the gun. "Get out," he said to Pike. "Take your men and ride. If you ever come back, if I ever hear of you operating anywhere in this territory, I'll hunt you down and finish this." Pike stared at him, something like respect flickering in those pale eyes. Then he nodded, struggled to his feet with help from the men who'd stayed, and mounted his horse. The gang rode out of Ashfall, heading north, leaving behind their dead and their empire. Rhett watched them until they were swallowed by dust and distance. Then he turned to the town, his town now, in a way. The fires were still burning, but people were fighting them now, bucket brigades forming, using dirt and whatever water could be salvaged. They'd lost buildings, yes, but not everything, not the important things. Chen limped over, grinning despite his wounds. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it?" Rhett corrected. "The well. That was brilliant." "Desperate," Chen said. "But it worked." Sarah joined them, and together they watched Ashfall begin the work of saving itself. People who'd been too afraid to speak a week ago were now organizing, leading, making decisions. The town was remembering how to be a community instead of a collection of victims. Over the next hours, they managed to contain the fires, though not before losing a third of the buildings. The general store was gone. The hotel was heavily damaged, and several homes were reduced to ash. But the saloon still stood, the church still stood, and most importantly, the people still stood. As sunset painted the sky in shades that matched the fires they'd fought, the survivors gathered in the church square. They were exhausted, wounded, grieving their losses, but they were free. Sarah climbed onto the church steps, her voice carrying. "We've lost a lot today. Buildings can be rebuilt, but we've gained something more important. We've gained ourselves back. We stood up. We fought. And we won." She looked at Rhett. "We couldn't have done it without a stranger who decided we were worth saving." The crowd turned to look at him, and Rhett felt uncomfortable under their gratitude. He'd just been trying to survive, to do the right thing for once. "Ashfall's yours again," he said. "Make it count. Build it stronger. Build it better, and never let anyone take it from you again. Chen stepped forward. Will you stay? Help us rebuild? We could use someone like you. It was tempting, more tempting than Rhett wanted to admit. These people had shown courage he hadn't expected. They'd earned their freedom and would probably keep it. But staying meant settling, and Rhett had never been good at that. He was a drifter for a reason. Some men were meant to pass through, not put down roots. I'll stay long enough to make sure Pike doesn't come back, he said. After that, we'll see. They accepted that, understanding that some debts couldn't be repaid with words. That night, as Ashfall licked its wounds and began planning its future, Rhett sat on the church steps again. Sarah found him there, carrying 2 cups of coffee that tasted like ash but were warm. Thank you, she said simply. You already thanked me. Not for saving the town, for reminding me what my father died for. He believed people were worth fighting for, even when they'd given up on themselves. She sipped her coffee. You proved him right. Your father did that himself. I just showed up at the right time. Wrong time for you, maybe. Pike made you a target. You could have ridden out. Yeah, I could have. They sat in silence, watching the stars emerge one by one over a town that had earned the right to see another dawn. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The townspeople organized work crews, began clearing debris, planning reconstruction. Rhett helped where he could, but mostly he watched, pleased to see them taking ownership of their future. A week after the battle, a rider arrived from Copperhead, one of Pike's former reinforcements, come to scout the situation. He found a town armed and determined, led by people who discovered they could fight. The rider took one look at Ashfall's new reality and rode back north without saying a word. 2 weeks later, Rhett was repairing the stable roof when Sarah climbed up to join him. There's been talk, she said, about making this official, having a real town council, electing a sheriff. Good. You need law. They want to elect you. Rhett's hammer paused mid-swing. No. Why not? You've earned it. You saved us. I'm not sheriff material. I'm not even town material. He went back to hammering. You do it. Your father's daughter, proven leader. They'd follow you. I'm not my father. No. You're better. He had principles, but no pragmatism. You've got both. She was quiet for a moment, considering. What about you? Where will you go? Wherever the road leads. There are other towns, other people who might need help. Other Pikes to fight? Maybe. Or maybe just somewhere quiet where I can drink in peace for once. Sarah smiled. Good luck with that. 3 weeks after the battle, with Ashfall well on its way to rebuilding and no sign of Pike's return, Rhett decided it was time. He saddled his horse in the pre-dawn darkness, packed his few belongings, checked his weapons one final time. The stable-keeper watched him with sad understanding. You're a good man, Mr. Calder. Ashfall won't forget you. Just make sure they remember what they did for themselves. I was just the spark. They were the fire. He led his horse out into the street, expecting to leave quietly. Instead, he found the entire town waiting. Chen stood at the front, his arm in a sling, but his smile bright. Sarah beside him, wearing a badge. They'd elected her sheriff, after all. Marcus, Rose, the storekeeper whose family Rhett had saved, the stable-keeper, everyone he'd fought beside. We wanted to see you off proper, Chen said. Give you something to remember us by. He handed Rhett a bundle. Inside was a new vest, hand-sewn, with Ashfall's name stitched in the lining. So wherever you go, Sarah added, you'll have a piece of home. I don't have a home. You do now. Ashfall's open to you any time. Forever. Rhett accepted the vest, not trusting himself to speak. He pulled it on, feeling the weight of their gratitude, their respect, their friendship. Make it count, he said finally. What you've won. Don't waste it. We won't, Sarah promised. Sheriff's honor. He mounted his horse, took one last look at the town he'd saved, and that had saved him in return, and rode out as the sun crested the horizon. Behind him, Ashfall breathed free for the first time in 3 years. Buildings were rising from ash. Children played without fear. The church bell rang, not in summons to terror, but in celebration of work done and day begun. Sarah stood in the street long after Rhett disappeared into the desert shimmer, Marcus beside her. Think he'll come back? The young man asked. No, Sarah said. Men like him don't come back. They just keep moving, keep fighting, keep trying to outrun whatever drives them. Shame. We could use him. We've got us. And he taught us that's enough. She turned back to the town, to the work waiting, to the future they'd earned. There would be challenges ahead, rebuilding, establishing real law, dealing with the aftermath of Pike's rule. But they'd face it together, as a community, as people who'd remembered how to stand. Somewhere to the west, Nemo Pike nursed his wounds in a nameless town, his gang scattered, his reputation ruined. He'd tried to rebuild, to reclaim what he'd lost, but word had spread. The man who'd lost Ashfall to a single drifter and a handful of shopkeepers. The invincible Nemo Pike, beaten by sheep who'd found their teeth. No one feared him anymore, and without fear, men like Pike were nothing. He drank himself to sleep most nights now, dreaming of pale eyes and steady hands, and the town that had refused to stay conquered. And far to the south, in a canyon only he knew, Rhett Calder made camp under stars that didn't judge, and wines that asked no questions. He wore the vest Ashfall had given him, felt the weight of their gift against his heart. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he slept without nightmares. The desert rolled on forever, indifferent to the small dramas of small men. But in one tiny corner of it, a town had learned to breathe again. And a drifter who'd thought himself beyond redemption had discovered that sometimes, just sometimes, one man's resolve really could rewrite fate. The legend of Ashfall spread slowly through the territory, whispered in saloons, shared at campfires, embellished with each telling. The town that stood up, the gang that fell, the stranger who'd taught them courage cost nothing but fear. Some said he was a marshal in disguise. Others claimed he was an outlaw seeking redemption. A few swore he was something supernatural, a ghost sent to balance scales. Rhett Calder was none of those things, and all of them. He was just a man who'd decided that running from problems didn't solve them, that sometimes you had to stand and fight even when the odds said you'd lose. Because some things were worth the risk, some people were worth saving, and some towns deserved a second chance. Ashfall got its second chance. They built it stronger, better, with laws that protected instead of oppressed, and leaders who served instead of ruled. Children grew up free. Families prospered. The town thrived. And on clear nights, when the wind blew just right, people swore they could hear it. The sound of a lone rider passing through the darkness, never stopping, always moving. A ghost on the frontier keeping watch over those who'd forgotten how to protect themselves. Rhett Calder had become legend. But the man himself rode on, seeking nothing, finding everything, carrying Ashfall in his heart and its lesson in his bones. One man couldn't change the world, but he could change one town. And sometimes that was enough. The sun set on another day in the endless desert, and somewhere a drifter made camp, brewed coffee over a small fire, and allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Ashfall was free. He'd given them that. And in return, they'd given him something he'd thought lost forever. Purpose.